Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I am so excited for this show. Dr. James Lindsay is going to be with us. If you are new to this channel and you're interested in being part of the solution to our education crisis, I hope you will subscribe. To be notified when I make new content or host live shows like this, please also take a moment to like and share this broadcast so others can benefit from the information we're about to get. And I want you to know that each of these shows is an opportunity to hear from people who are working to improve education in America any way they can. If you're a parent or an educator concerned about the current state of education in America, or in the world for that matter, Dr. James Lindsay ought to be a household name to you. He's an American-born author, mathematician, and professional troublemaker, as any of us who are on Twitter can attest to. He's written 6 books, well, actually now 7, spanning a range of subjects, including religion, the philosophy of science, and postmodern theory. He's a leading expert in critical race theory, which leads him to reject it completely. He's the founder of New Discourses, which you should be subscribed to, and is currently promoting his new book, The Marxification of Education, Paulo Freire's Critical Marxism and the Theft of Education, which you should buy and read immediately. I've asked him to speak to us today about his latest research into SEL. He's been talking about SEL for a very long time now, better part of a year, I would say. And he covered something new in his latest podcast entitled WTF is SEL. If you have not listened to it yet, it's a must. After this broadcast, you're going to wish you listened to it before. I've listened to it twice. This show will focus on asking James questions I had as I was listening. So without further ado, let's welcome James Lindsay to the show. Welcome, James.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I've listened to that thing twice now.
No, that's 6 hours, isn't it?
I kept myself busy. I was cleaning and decorating and doing all the holiday things. And, it's not quite the same as Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, but, I think actually more Clown World-like than
it's bad. Yeah.
Rankin Bass could come up with.
Yeah. There's some reindeer games going on in there for sure. I was pretty shocked to actually start learning that and reading that. That was actually at the end of September is when I started to read that, and I didn't do anything with it until this long. I didn't know what to do with it.
You probably felt as you were, because even after listening to you and knowing the level of depth you go to as far as your research and verifying everything and sort of checking off, checking that everything actually aligns, like, is it really in the UN building and so forth? I still went down the rabbit hole. So even after I listened to the first 3 hours, I followed up with my own research. So audience, I did do that, did my due diligence, checked it all out. It all checks out. Every single thing he's saying checks out. Not that I would doubt James. I just want you to know that we're both sitting here having looked at the same material. And part of why I did that is cognitive dissonance. Did you have that? You were like, this can't.
But I had it so bad I got health problems. Are you kidding? I spent the level of stress that I experienced from this was severe, and in a variety of different for a variety of different reasons. I think it's like, how can I not talk about this was a thought, and it's like, how do I talk about this? How do I talk about this and not sound like I've gone completely off the deep end?
Right.
And should I talk about this? And to the point where I actually, I'll just be a bit frank, managed to stress myself into a low-grade heart condition. This was very, very, I took this very seriously. And as far as verifying and checking off the research, it's not like they make it hard. You can actually check virtually everything you probably did. In about 20 minutes, you can actually verify everything.
Yeah, I don't want anyone to think I was spending like 3-4 hours. That's how easy it was. It was like, it's in plain sight, guys.
It's not even hidden. And I just keep coming back to it. And, I wanted to figure out how to approach the podcast, and I wanted to put this out, I had the concept of what I had to title the podcast probably together in October, and had no idea how to put it together. And I finally realized that what I need to do is just roll through the history backwards, offer lots of quotes, just read it directly and say, this is what it says, and then ask a lot of questions. Hence the title being actually a question. WTF is SEL? What in the world, will be polite, is social emotional learning? Because this is, it's straight up the occult. And I'm not saying, oh, it's the occult, like I read that. No, the author that I'm tracing it back to, named Alice Bailey, actually says in her book explicitly that you're separating students in educational contexts so that some of them are going to be workers, and some of them are going to be mystics, and some of them are going to be occultists. And that's her words. It's all the occult. The word occult appears in her book, I don't know how many times. I probably should actually go look, but a lot. So it was very difficult to figure out what I was supposed to do with this information. And then I finally just kind of felt inspired and went for it.
Right. And I think for those who haven't yet listened to the podcast, what we should do is just do a quick overview of what you discovered, kind of like the high points, like an outline, and then get into, I had some questions. Almost all of them are devil's advocate kind of questions, because I'm anticipating things the audience might say or wonder aloud. And then you can, I have my own answers. You have yours, I'm sure. And then I even took the liberty of bringing up all the links and things so I can actually show people some of the language side by side so they can see. Because first do the outline and then we'll get into the questions.
Yeah. Sure. And the answer, by the way, is 15. The answer is 15 times. The word occult appears in that book, at least with a lot of hyphens. Sometimes it doesn't find hyphenated, line breaking things when you do a search for a term. So occult or occultism or whatever appears 15 times in the book. And this is just one of her 24 books. And so I will kind of just take you through, I will take you into the rabbit hole as I went into it. So I've been reading about social emotional learning, as you said in the introduction, for a while, sort of independently and sort of simultaneously with Jennifer McWilliams. She wrote an article some time ago pointing out is definitely in the summer, because I remember it was early in the summer, because by late summer, when I did my education workshop in DC, that's come out, the 4-part critical education workshop I did, and a lot of people have seen that. I mention it in there, and I credit Jennifer McWilliams in there. And I remember looking up her source and having kept the tab open a long time to be able to cite it for that particular presentation I did. So she pointed out that social emotional learning, it's no secret, it's on all of the necessary things, it's in all the documents, came from this place called the Fetzer Institute. Fetzer. This isn't a secret. You go to the Handbook of Social Emotional Learning and Research and Practice. This is a fairly standard issue, major textbook on the subject, published in 2015 or 16. And they tell you from the get-go, and it's mentioned in there. And so it's on the Fetzer website. It's on the CASEl website. It's like nobody's hiding it. CASEl, the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning, and the program of SEL emerged in 94 and 95 successively from the Fetzer Institute, having conferences about education. Now, Jennifer McWilliams points out that the Fetzer Institute is a New Age spiritualism organization. And I looked into it deeply enough to confirm that, and didn't look much more deeply at the time. So here we have spirituality and education. Everybody has the sense that a lot of this stuff has like a religious feel or a religious component, and maybe there's a First Amendment violation happening with what's happening in our, with woke stuff in the schools. And so I'm like, finally one day I'm like, I'm going to have to look in. It just keeps crossing my path. I'm going to look into the Fetzer Institute. I've seen they had a conference, Spirituality and Education. That's literally what it was called. They did all this they do these weird prayer retreats and all this, or meditation retreats kind of things. And so I'm like, who in the world is John Fetzer anyway? What's the Fetzer Institute? So I started looking it up. It's a real weird place. It's in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I'm like, okay, it's shaped like a triangle. I'm like, that's
lots of triangles with them. Yeah.
Apparently triangles everywhere throughout the building. And it turns out that John Fetzer was a radio magnate. He made a ton of money working in radio. I don't know how much. I didn't look that up, but enough to, when he created the Fetzer Institute, he was able to gift it $200 million. So a lot. of initial seed money out of his own pocket to create this institute, 200 million laying around. He also was rich enough from his exploits in radio to buy and own the Detroit Tigers baseball team, for a Major League Baseball team, for a number of years, many years, actually decades, during which time they were kind of famously a terrible team, but that's beside the point. So
well, when you consult the Ouija board to decide,
when you consult the Ouija board to decide who's going to be the pitcher. And you think we're joking.
we're not kidding, guys. That's what he did. Yes.
Well, sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he channeled the Archangel Michael instead.
Forgot. Yes.
Yeah, of course. Sometimes he did.
And he told the players to visualize, like
talk to the ball and tell it where to go into the strike zone. And like that. Great. So this guy manifest it. That's right. It's a secret. The secret. This guy was a new age spirituality wacko. I mean, if it was something that sounds spiritual, he was into it. Started out as a Seventh-day Adventist, bailed out of that Christian offshoot, became a straight up occultist. Got it. It didn't matter who it was, what it was. He said that he dabbled in all of it. Some of it he liked, some of it he didn't like, but he had this huge library of quote unquote spiritual literature that's all this kind of weird new age or occult or whatever, but also going back into the esoteric religions, Hermeticism and Gnosticism. He was into this stuff, and he built the Institute to try to figure out how to have like a new global spirituality. And that right at the point when the CASEl stuff starts happening, the Institute took a curve right before John Fetzer died in 91, actually started to take a curve into how to bring this new age spirituality and angle into education in order to educate kids on a spiritual level instead. And among the people that are these kind of weird esotericists that John Fetzer was so into, and I say this guy believed in some crazy stuff. He believed he was reincarnated. Nobody's ever just reincarnated from some dude, right? No, he was reincarnated from Thomas Jefferson. And that wasn't enough, because Thomas Jefferson in turn, so he also had been reincarnated from the Apostle Paul. So this is the kind of mind we're dealing with behind the scenes at the Fetzer Institute. And the Fetzer Institute, whether it's with people like Tim Shriver or what's his name, the guy that wrote the emotional intelligence book. Goldman or
what is his name? Daniel Goleman.
Goleman, that's right. Daniel Goleman. These guys were there at the present. These are all they're all into like unity this and like, global that, all the time, everything. Emotional intelligence, which is basically not real. It's mostly about how sophisticated your vocabulary with emotional words is, or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, they're all in this, and the goal is to teach kids this stuff. So what was it though that John Fetzer, like, who was his favorite occult theosophy esotericist that he was into? Is this woman, Alice A. Bailey. And Alice Bailey, in all of her books, there are 24 of them, like we mentioned. I was mentioning, I counted Occult out of the book called Education in the New Age. That's one of the 24. That's the one that I read from in the podcast. It's the only one I've read in full. I've read a little bit of a couple others of her books, but they are similarly flavored throughout. Who was this character? So Alice Bailey, I think, was kind of a fraud. She was being brought up in the so-called Theosophical Society of Helena Blavatsky, who was this occultist who was also a fraud. It's hard to talk about this without, like, it's frauds on top of frauds. Helena Blavatsky just briefly got in. She apparently traveled to India at some point. She apparently came back to London and created some weird theosophical society of kind of mysticism and occult and whatever. And she wove in themes from the esoteric religions like Hermeticism and Gnosticism, but she also wove in stuff from Buddhism and Hindu religion.
She's reincarnated and speaking to us from the grave.
Yeah, exactly. I see that. And so Helena Blavatsky has this theosophical society. Alice Bailey's a member of it. Then Alice Bailey starts doing her own channelings and gets kicked out.
Not allowed.
Now she's talking to the source spirits directly, which might turn out to lead you to contradict the guru and have the same level of authority in your irresolvable conflict here. Yeah. Blavatsky had a number of other famous proteges, Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, being one, Annie Besant, one of the leading Fabian socialists, being one, which brings another neat connection because Margaret Sanger left the UK with H.G. Wells, who was a Fabian socialist as well, to come to the United States. And so Alice Bailey's in this milieu. I think she ends up in the U.S. anyway at some
Yeah,
point.
she married somebody and
Foster Bailey.
yeah.
Foster Bailey, who is a 32nd degree Freemason. By the way, Mr. John Fetzer got so interested in Freemasonry, he joined and became a 33rd degree, which is the top level, allegedly, of Freemasonry, Scottish Rite Freemason. And so he went all the way through. If it was mystical, John Fetzer wanted to be there, but he took these books that Alice Bailey wrote, and they all contain this thing called the Great Invocation. And that was every Monday night meeting that they had for the Fetzer Institute. They went through and recited the entire Great Invocation.
Yeah, I brought it up in case we wanted to look at it. I actually
why don't we?
Grabbed it. Yeah, let's show everybody this thing that was read every single after every single, what was it, Monday night you said meeting?
They're Monday night meetings, yeah, the Great Invocation.
So there's the Great Invocation, and I think if we put ourselves to the side, it's a little easier. Yeah. Okay, and so there it is, right? From the point of light within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth from the point of love within the heart of God. Let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ, and notice the asterisks, return to earth from the center where the will of God is known. Let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. And this is the asterisk. Many religions believe in a world teacher, a coming one, knowing him under such names as the Lord Maitreya, the Imam Mahdi, the Kaika Avatar, the Bodhisattva. These terms are sometimes used in versions of the Great Invocation for people of specific faiths. When I heard this, and then I also heard you talking in the podcast about a lot of their beliefs about the group has to get together and find, get to the divine plan on earth. It's always the group, and the group will know, and the enlightened ones and all this.
The masters know the plan on earth. That's what it says in the invocation.
And I kept thinking, these people, whoever they are, they believe this stuff, are not only making of themselves gods. I mean, they're basically saying, we know what's best for everybody, the whole planet, all of you. But as appealing as it might be to some people, I can imagine there's some people that go, wouldn't that be lovely? Light and love and everything, everybody, no war, it's all peaceful. But they forget one key thing. Someone decides, and it isn't you. Like
that's right.
These masters, these people, whoever they are, somehow know. They just have this knowledge. And you talk about that in the podcast.
That's right. So they're the elites. They're the masters. They're the gurus. They're the ones that channel the archangel or speak to God's mind directly. They're the Gnostics. They are Gnostics. They believe that they've had a special encounter with the deity. They have special knowledge about the true nature of reality that's been hidden from everybody who hasn't gone through their esoteric rites. Those are the people that are going to become the masters. For setting the stage for the world. They're the ones that know the plan and thus want to bring it into fruition. What? The plan for humanity and the world. And so it's their job to complete humanity in the world in that regard. If we get back into the esoteric religions, if we go back into, say, the idea of Hermeticism, the idea is that what the fall of man represents, falling away from God in Hermeticism, is that there is distinction between us and God. Humans and God are no longer co-continuous. We're now separated. And so there's a distinction between the divine and the mundane, or the godly and the human. And this distinction is to be obliterated. So they also have a set of principles, and one of their key principles, the first of their key principles in Hermeticism, is the principle of mind, or the mental principle, which is that everything is mental. And so what you're supposed to do to return to the source and become God and complete the plan is that we obliterate all differences between our minds. So we all come to think exactly the same way. And so the totalitarianism and the totalism that we see in movements like Nazism and communism, Maoism, etc., as variants on these things, all starts to make sense. What we're dealing with, and this is crazy that we're looking at it through this weird theosophical thing. What we're dealing with here is a gigantic world religion that nobody talks about, that has a current running through all of Western history. And this is just, it's kind of, this is 1920 some odd when this book
Right.
was written, or 1930 some odd. The Great Invocation was at least by the 20s for Alice Bailey. I don't know if she stole it from Blavatsky or not. I haven't read
Mhm.
much of Blavatsky yet. She's got a couple of books. I read a little bit of one of them, which is called The Secret Teaching or something like that. And I just kind of checked out. I was like, I can't read more of this crap right now. I can only handle so much crazy. I know everybody thinks I seem to have a bottomless appetite for crazy, but it turns out I don't.
Yeah, I can relate to that. But the thing that and they even use the words as the group thinks.
That's right.
As the
Yeah.
group thinks, like
Which
that's
is what you
possible.
see in Ferrari, which is where he says that the I is fulfilled in the we. I think because we think. It's the exact same mentality, and it's the exact same thing. So I'm reading all this and I'm like, oh no. And then it gets worse. I haven't gotten into the details that made me decide I had to do something with this. You're like, oh, that book's real weird. Well, I read the book and that's really, really weird. But let's just talk about some more details. We talked about John Fetzer channeling with the psychic named Jim Gordon, the archangel Michael, to get advice. We talk about him doing other seances and channelings. We talk about him using his Ouija board to make business decisions. All true. We talk about him talking to the baseball. We talk about him, believing he's reincarnated from the Apostle Paul and Thomas Jefferson. Okay, this is this character filling his
Always the
library with this
famous
stuff.
people. It's not the janitor. He's
Yeah, it's
reincarnated
never some
Thomas
normal
Jefferson.
dude. It's Thomas Jefferson, of anybody you could pick. And so what about Alice Bailey? So Alice Bailey has these crackpot ideas. She gets chased out of the Theosophical Society, comes to the U.S. at some point in this. But in 1922, she decides she wants to publish her ravings. I mean, what she calls her writings, these books that she's writing at the time about all of her crazy ideas. And she creates a publishing company to do so. This is easily verified. The original name, we were just on their website, by the way. So that's a real
Yeah,
publishing company.
that
But
is
the
real.
original name for their publishing company was the Lucifer Publishing Company.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, that was a badly
Right.
chosen name. And in a couple of years, in 1924, Alice Bailey realized that wasn't a good name for the publishing company for some reason,
Wonder
and
why.
renamed it the Lucius Publishing Company. And the Lucius,
Right.
Lucis, as you saw on the website up in the corner with a weird symbol, if you saw it. And this got reincorporated as a trust, because if you read her books, she thanks repeatedly people like the Rockefellers and the Fords for giving her lots of money.
Yep.
And so the Lucius Trust becomes the thing. And that was originally called the Lucifer Publishing Company. And then, you're like, oh, well, maybe I'll look into it. Maybe we should go check out their office. Where is it? And you click on the contact link on their website and they tell
Yes.
you their address. And you're like, how can this be? And
Where
contact us
is
at
it?
somewhere.
They've got the context somewhere about the Lucius
It's
Trust.
real easy to find on the phone. It's in their little drop down.
Yeah, on the drop down, it is really easy to
It's real
find.
easy to find on the
Keep in
phone.
touch. But
I
I
haven't
saw
looked
it
at it on.
myself. It is literally at the UN.
It is
I'll
at
find it.
866 United Nations Plaza.
That's right.
Originally addressed 666 United Nations Plaza, but they
And
changed that.
they
Oh
have
yeah.
a whole section on the United Nations. And I also brought up to show people they have a recent blog. Wait a minute, that one is also, hang on a second. Where they're talking about, in search of a new culture, perspectives on human flourishing. I brought this up because I imagine people watching and listening to you might start thinking like, okay, well that's really creepy and weird, James, and that Fetzer, we get that this guy Fetzer was enamored of her and into her stuff, and but these people lived a long time ago, and SEL's happening now and so forth. But so I mean, like, how do you think they're connected? And so I started scrolling through this, and I started looking at, first of all, the things that they're saying about education, like here, where they say the new group of world servers is presently expanding in size. Servers are basically who they refer to like their disciples, their people at their little clubs and their groups. And and influence, size and influence, there currently is increasing with a multitude of creative ideas to meet today's challenges. And there are many signs that a realignment with the divine plan is currently taking place in the many initiatives that are exploring how a new type of culture can take root around the world. Nowhere is this more important than in the philosophy of education. For the way we educate influences thought, perception, desire, and action in all areas of human enterprise. Of real significance here is UNESCO's worldwide initiative, Futures of Education Learning to Become. This
Learning
new
to
goal,
become is Marxist, by the way. That's
yes, it
Hegelian
is.
or Hermetic magic. That's becoming. Things are supposed to become what they were meant to be. The divine plan is supposed to get back on track so things can become what they're meant to be. Humans are to be made to become who they were meant to be. Trans people are never actually trans. They're becoming trans eternally.
That's right.
So just to point out that magic word becoming, that's a trigger word if you're paying attention to these things.
Exactly. And this is the new goal. This new goal for education has been described as global citizenship. Wait, have we heard that from CASEl? Have we heard that in SEL? Like constantly. Global citizenship for human flourishing, which they also talk about in SEL. And the spirit of this ideal permeates the landmark report that has now been published, Reimagining Our Futures Together, a New Social Contract for Education. The report served as the key reference document for the recent United Nations Summit, Transforming Education, which was here. This is where they talk about that. So I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to, as we're talking about this, quickly, connect the dots for people that yes, this woman is was saying all these things back in, the 1920s, the 1930s, so forth. And then you mentioned in the podcast how she probably most likely wrote her book, the book you were reading from about education in the new age, possibly in the late 30s, but it wasn't really published until the 50s. She died in 49. So it had to have been written before then. And so it's tempting as it is to say, well, okay, some crackpot people did this trendy new age gobbledygook back then. Here it is today on a website talking about things going on at the UN and UNESCO today. And we know for a fact that CASEl and UNESCO and SEL are, forget playing footsie, they're
They're the same
orgies.
thing. They're literally basically
They're
the same thing. It's like there's no difference between those two pictures that you just showed me. Yeah, and so here you see the same language again, the transformative power of education. That could be on any CASEl document. That could be on any NEA document right now. That could be on any UNESCO document right now about education. It could be on any World Economic Forum document. This is the exact same language again and again. But what really sealed the deal, because I went into, I was like, I don't know how to record this, but I've you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go read some excerpts. And there was this one quote when I was reading The Education in the New Age. And I know your listeners are dying to know what New Age we're talking about. Do you want to tell them?
Age of Aquarius.
It's the Age of Aquarius. Of course it is.
I had to.
Of course it is. And so there's this one passage that just stuck out to me like a sore thumb when I read it. And if I may, I opened the podcast with it. I'll do a little bit longer read. It says, much greater care will have to be given in picking and training the teachers of the future. Their mental attainments and their knowledge of their particular subject will be of importance, but so knowing things, being smart, knowing your subject matter will be important, but more important still will be the need for them to be free from prejudice and to see all men as members of a great family. Sounds like inclusion, doesn't it? The educator of the future, she says, will need to be more of a trained psychologist than he is today. Besides imparting academic knowledge, he will realize that his major task is to evoke out of his class of students a real sense of responsibility, no matter what he has to teach: history, geography, mathematics, languages, science in its various branches, or philosophy. He will relate it all to the science of right human relations, you mean equity and sustainability, and try to give a truer perspective than in the past upon social organization. And it's like, wow, that really kind of is what SEL does. And then there's another section, and I'd have to go into and dig around to figure it out, that when I was reading through and constructing what I wanted to put in the podcast, it's like most of the CASEl 5 are listed here in kind of description rather than given quite explicitly, but you can see the bridge between the social emotional learning 5 competency areas getting outlined by CASEl and this particular
Right.
book by Alice Bailey rather unambiguously. And then you have the bridge character of John Fetzer, because when I started organizing the podcast, I thought, well, I know it came from the Fetzer Institute. Maybe that's a coincidence. Maybe they were offering a facility. Somebody's looking for a conference for education, yada, yada. These things happen. And then I start to read backwards into this book, and it's so weird that it didn't stick out at first. I read this book twice. And when I read it the second time is when I started to develop a heart condition. And then I was like, the Christians would say that I'm being attacked by demons, and I'm not sure I'm entirely going to disbelieve them on this. I think it was just stress, but you never know. And so then I read this part again, though, and this sticks out. The educator of the future has to be a psychologist. They're going to educate in the science of right human relations. That's going to be woven into all of the subjects. Their subject matter competence and intelligence aren't that important. They have to be instead equitable and inclusive. That's not the words used, but those are the words that we would use in 2022 to describe the same thing. And then, like I said, the section where you can derive the CASEl 5, self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision making, relationship skills, and then social awareness. And you can actually see the arc in the book to go through those 5. And if you don't know that these 5, they're in order. They go clockwise, starting in the orange. So self-awareness, self-management, those are kindergarten, first grade, second grade skills. Responsible decision making as you get to the upper elementary years. Relationship skills in junior high. Social awareness as you progress into high school. That is a progression that they are laying out there in the CASEl.
They also don't mean what that you think they mean.
None of them do.
No. So when parents see these, typically they say, well, of course I want my child to be self-aware. I want them to manage their emotions. I mean, these sound absolutely legit. Like, why wouldn't we want these things? Well, when you understand that self-awareness is this woo-woo, spiritual, goofy soul garbage, right? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, exactly.
The self-management is about also sort of denying your desires, denying what you see with your own eyes, denying this sort of objective reality that you live in, and tapping into whatever this other feeling, emotion stuff is. Responsible decision making is understanding your duty to the collective. That's what responsible means in this world. Relationship skills, these are the right human relations. And James, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what she meant by right human relations. And then the social awareness, of course, again, gets back to your duty, gets back to, your awareness of your place in the collective and what you're supposed to be doing and how you should use your gifts for the good of all. But what did she mean exactly by right human relations?
Well, I mean, that's a little bit ambiguous. It's never defined in this book, and it's also not defined in at least the portion of her 5-volume set. I forgot what it's titled. I'd have to go look at the top of this book that I've read a little bit of. My guess is that it is, because she says, actually the foreword to this book says, our problem is to attain the kind of overall synthesis that Marxism and neo-scholasticism provide for their followers, but to get this by the freely chosen cooperative methods that Dewey advocated, meaning John Dewey, the educator. It talks about having, 3 fundamental needs must be met. This is again from the foreword by a professor, not by Alice Bailey. Says a psychological theory of the human person to be educated. Educated is in scare quotes. A social theory of the kind of society one is trying to create or preserve as a suitable home for the cultural ideas promulgated. And 3, a worldview or cosmology, a theory of man's place in the universe in which man is a spectator and actor. And so I see and would guess that sustainability and inclusion, the 2 big buzzwords of the decade, are the science of right human relations. We're going to learn to be diverse, equitable, and inclusive. We're going to learn to be environmentally responsible. We're going to learn to uphold sustainability and to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And the main book is called A Treatise on the 7 Rays, by the way.
Right. But the idea of teaching children a cosmology is literally teaching children a theology.
That's right. This is a religion, because it's a spirit. I would go cautiously, just because I want this nail to land in this coffin all the way. And so a cosmology itself can be a non-religious object that tries to explain why we have a universe and how it works. Fine. But when you're talking about one that is explicitly a spiritual cosmology, you are now teaching a religion. This is not ambiguous. This is a non-ambiguous statement. If you were teaching, and in fact, it's not only is it non-ambiguous, it meets the federal government's definition for a religion, which is, if you didn't know, there's a great law review article. If I remember correctly, it's by Ben Clements, but I'd have to check that. Outlining the history of First Amendment Establishment Clause jurisprudence to determine what definition should work. And it boils down to a system of belief. What is it? Belief something in practice. A system of belief in practice. We'll go with that. That gives answers to fundamental questions about the world and man's role in it, such that it gives rise to duties of conscience. So in other words, you have a system of belief in practice. It answers fundamental questions about life and being, and it inspires you to do things in the right way versus wrong way. And in other words, it has a science of right human relations. So we are dealing with something that is explicitly religious instruction at that point, unambiguously, unequivocally, not like let's split hairs. There's no splitting hairs here. This is explicitly religious instruction. And it seems to be the undergirding, and not even like a real religion, like literally theosophy, literally esoteric occult stuff.
One of
masters and gurus that know the plan, in other words, which is literally a cult, not occult, a cult,
right?
A space cult.
One of our audience members was doing, while we're talking, went and did a deep dive into their site and found this, which you may have seen. I don't know.
No, I haven't seen this one.
Okay, Contemplative and Transformative Pedagogy, published in Cosmos Journal. This is in 2006, and I think pulled from here. I mean, this is, not super long, but too long for us to read here. But pulled out of it was this portion. Oop, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry, hang on. Let me get it over here and go back to this. Okay. So pulled out of it was this portion. An education that would reach beyond information must work deeper. It will need to transform the very container of consciousness, make it more supple and complex. Hang on, I would love to find this actual passage. Let me see if I can do a find.
Oh, it was at the bottom of the screen where you were before. I
Was it really?
reading it with you. Yeah. I was like, wow, she's going to read it like cut off halfway.
Oh, okay. So where
it was literally right at the bottom.
Here it is. Here it is. An education that will reach beyond information must work deeper. It will need to transform the very container of consciousness, make it more supple and complex. For this, we educators need pedagogical tools other than those optimized for informational transfer. At its most advanced stage, we will need to help our students and ourselves to create dynamic cognitive framework that can challenge established intellectual boundaries and even sustain the conflicting values and viewpoints that comprise our planetary human community.
Yeah,
challenge.
This is the spiritual drive underneath the whole kind of like global citizen, globalist, one global unity mindset that they're pushing within all of education right now. And
the usefulness of secular contemplative practice is being increasingly appreciated by educators at hundreds of North American universities and colleges. For example, in collaboration with the Center of Contemplative Mind and Society, the American Council of Learned Societies has granted 120 contemplative practice fellowships to professors over the last 10 years, supporting them in designing courses that include contemplative practice as pedagogical strategy. And this Columbia University, at conferences at summer schools at Columbia University and Amherst College and elsewhere, professors have gathered to share their experience in the emerging area of contemplative pedagogy. Now, while we're there, contemplative pedagogy, this is now transformed. This is 2006. This is what this looks like now.
Teachers College, Columbia University.
Teachers College, Columbia University.
The Science of Spirituality. And that was exactly what it said in the other column where you just left off, is that it said that that one of the reasons that they're so interested in bringing indigenous perspectives is it allows them to bridge the divide between spirituality and science. And so we have to have indigenous sciences. So why are they so interested in bringing in different spiritual traditions? So they say there's 120 spiritual traditions. Well, it turns out if we look back at the Hermetic principles or the Hermetic concept. The Hermetic concept is inherently what they call syncretistic. It actually, just like John Fetzer, it's like a smorgasbord or like a cafeteria where you go get whatever spiritual things you want and cobble them together into your own cult, because they believe in this thing called the Prisca Theologia, which is the ancient theology, or sometimes the Philosophia Perennis, which is the perennial or eternal philosophy. In other words, they believe there's one true religion. Every religion, every philosophy, every science is actually just one like face. Picture one true religion like a big giant diamond, like the Arkenstone in The Hobbit, and has 1,000 faces. Each face is a religion, a philosophy, or whatever. So it doesn't matter which religious traditions they bring in, as long as they bring in religious traditions, because in their view, there's only one religion and they all are actually the same one. So if you can break apart this idea that we're going to learn sciences rigorously and weave in mysticism and spirituality of whatever type and say that that's a valid part of the scientific approach, then you can undermine STEM, which is of course going to box them out completely if it's being done right. And then you can direct people toward the one true religion. This is what they always do. They're like, oh yeah, what they said it with the great invocation. Christ, asterisk, Christ also means the Buddha. It means the Bodhisattva. It means this. It means that. Mayatra or whatever. It's Christ was a Christ, not the Christ. And we can all have Christ consciousness. All we have to do is break open the vessel of consciousness and become self-begetting beings in the Hermetic tradition. And then we can have this. And when you reach that consciousness, you'll see, oh, well, that religion and this religion, they're not actually different. We've already been practicing it. So this is what their idea with this science of spirituality nonsense is, that they're pushing for. This is to make education explicitly religious. All these conservative Christians, bless them for their fight, are missing the key and most important point. This is not secular education gone amok. This is esoteric religious education pretending to be secular so it can get away with it.
That's
which is
right.
what Karl Marx did. He took mysticism and made it political so nobody would recognize that it's mysticism.
Well, Kant, I mean, wasn't that Kant's whole point is I'm trying to like resuscitate religion in some kind of way and I'm going to make it relevant for.
Yes. And Hegel's point was that the true philosophy is the esoteric religion. So Hegel, following after Kant, looking at Kant's dialectic as a useful tool, Kant doing mostly a kind of religious rejection of the Enlightenment. Hegel's like, I have my religion, and it's actually that the Trinity is a process of becoming, God becoming who he is through the phenomenology of spirit, for example, the development of the idea becoming that which is in the material world and manifests in action in humans, which manifest even more in action in the state, that give rise to a spirit of society, the Geist, the Weltgeist, which is the Worldgeist, which is what they're trying to manifest, one unified Worldgeist, Weltgeist, and then or maybe it's the Zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, or maybe it's the local spirit of the community or the nation, a Volksgeist. And you're supposed to that is supposed to be the kind of crucible in which transformation occurs that causes the idea to transform. So then God becomes more aware that he's God. And then Hegel calls this no shit a system of science. So it's esoteric religion being dressed up as Christianity turned into a process religion as opposed to a actual faith, and then which Hegel's philosophy becomes therefore the only one true religion that subsumes all else. And then he calls it science. Marx is like, get rid of the mysticism, like get rid of the mystification, get rid of the spirituality, cut God out of it. Man is the center. Let's make it about politics. That's man's true, real condition, is social relations, private property, and politics. Let's fight in those domains. And then he hid the mysticism in politics and economics. And 100 million people died as a result of us not knowing this. Over 1 billion people have suffered untold horrors because of us not knowing this. And we're facing the greatest attempt to overthrow the world and destroy our kids' minds because we still refuse to know this.
Right. And I mean, it is so galling to me that you've got these people in places, like I said, you've got, Teachers College, Columbia. This is major. And I want to show you something that really stood out to me about this, where they have here it is. Well, first of all, check this out. Science is a lens of witness. So you mentioned
right.
John Fetzer, his goal was to blend science and religion.
That's explicitly his goal.
That was explicitly his goal. And here we are. The purpose of this thing is this Teachers College Institute is the science of spirituality and to bring it into education. They're explicit about it. And they're not saying only private education, all education. The person behind this wrote a book called The Awake Mind. This is all based on her book, The Awake Mind, which I bet if we read it, we'd find some ties back to Alice Bailey. If she doesn't explicitly cite Alice Bailey, probably you're going to see words and concepts that are the same. But look at this. This blew my mind. A spiritual core shapes development, meaning, purpose, calling, and connection. Now, one of the things I've said to my audience is the only thing that is not allowed to be binary in America anymore is sex. Everything else apparently is a false premise of a binary or a dialectic, as you put it. So we've got developmental task, self is, and they're saying with a spiritual core, it's inherent worth. Without a spiritual core, it's abilities based. Like you can't have a spiritual core and have an abilities based self identity. You can't. That's their claim. Identity, meaning, and purpose. Without a spiritual core, it's just acquiring success. I mean, this is an Ivy League institution, and they're presenting this as like, well, this is how it is. And we know, and it's correct. And what I'm worried about is you're going to have parents out there who might have this presented to them at some point by their school district and saying, well, this is why we're doing it. Because it'll make nicer humans. Your children will be nicer people, better people. They'll be more in touch with themselves, more self-aware and more responsible and all this. And they'll show them this and parents will be like, oh, yes, well, I wouldn't want them to not be in touch with their inherent worth. I wouldn't want them to lack meaning and purpose. I want to challenge us and say, I'm sorry, what? Since when do you not have inherent worth and abilities? Why can't those coexist? But they separate them and then tell you this is how it is, and we're right and you're wrong, and we're going to change the world. Give us billions of dollars of taxpayer money, and we're going to go create this new thing in your school. Your kid will be required to participate. It's going to be infused in every subject, every single subject. Oh, P.S., we're going to have them take surveys constantly to take their pulse and poke around in their brain and collect data on which of the kind of person are they going to be? They're going to be the mystical, the occult, which of these? That's what they're gathering. I'm surprised they're not taking their birthdays and feeding them into an astrological ephemeris at this point. Maybe they
probably are.
Maybe they are.
They probably are. I'm trying to find a quote real quick. Actually, we have in 2016, there was a document put out by the World Economic Forum, and it quotes Klaus Schwab, and I can't find it quickly enough. It's on my phone, but I don't have it on my desktop or laptop, I guess. So I'll just paraphrase. But he says that there's an important role of faith to be played in their agenda, because he says that values cannot be justified by the intellect alone. For values to be justified requires faith. And so when you start talking about trying to transform values, maybe into a science of right human relations, then you have to invoke spirituality. You have to invoke faith. You have to invoke religious experience. And so again and again, like you said, these are Ivy Leagues. This is what's going on, you know?
Yeah.
And the why did I title my podcast WTF is SEL? It's WTF is going on here.
And these are, this is what they want in their Awakened Schools Institute. They're actually starting schools. And when you look at their objectives, I'm like, is this Alice Bailey? They're saying, to encourage teachers and school leaders to nurture and ground their practice in their own spirituality, to reclaim why teachers enter teaching initially, reclaiming the excitement, love, and purpose, to experience what spirituality and education means, and to tie that to the reason for becoming a teacher.
It should mean losing your license and going to jail, but
right. And they have, whole school change requires a team made up of members who are experienced and seen as leaders. The Awakened Schools and Institute will invite small teams of teachers and educational leaders to participate in a year-long process of nourishment, relationship building, and reimagining education for school culture change. Now, where have we heard these terms before? We've to change the whole school culture. You talked about WISC. How does that fit into this? WISC, for those who don't know, is the whole child, whole school, whole community.
Whole school, whole child, whole community. WSCC. They only count the W once, for
Yeah, but
some
they say it
reason.
again.
Yeah, whole everything. I mean, this
Yeah.
is, I mean, whether we could talk about the concept of holism, which I already kind of mentioned within this picture of Hermeticism, but which is, the reason that we're not divine or don't realize that we're divine, and that the divine itself therefore doesn't realize that it's divine, is
Yeah.
because we're not whole. We're not
Right.
holistic. They don't look for atonement. They put hyphens in it, and I kid you not. They look for at one-ment. And so
Yes.
we're going to become at one with one another and with the world and everything. So it's a holistic idea. So we can't understand the child unless we understand the whole child. What's its whole life? What's its psychology? It's not just about trying to figure out how much math he knows. We have to figure out the whole child. What medical needs do they have? What social issues are they facing? So we have to have social and emotional learning. We have to have, whatever medical stuff. We have to have affirming care in the schools. The whole child has to be attended to. What's his home life like? That's part of it. So we need social workers checking out his parents if they aren't going along with the program. We need the parents trained in social emotional learning initiatives. That's actually something that's in all of the documentation, is that it needs to spread out from the schools into the homes. And
Right.
so that's the home. No, that's a child. That's whole child, whole school. The whole school has to be redevoted to this process. They call this systemic SEL, systemic social emotional learning. It has to be, just like Alice Bailey said, woven into all of the other subjects.
Right.
You're going to teach math through an SEL programming so that it delivers an equity, sustainability, and inclusion lens. This is what you
Exactly.
have to do. So the whole school has to be reorganized to be a delivery mechanism for the social emotional learning value set and spirituality program. And then the whole community is where it has to be extended to. And that's the WISC model, WSCC, whole
Right.
school, whole child, whole community. And this is holistic, holistic, holistic. And if you read Marx, or if you read Marx's disciples like Paulo Freire, for example, all you hear is how important it is to stop understanding things in terms of the parts, but you have to understand the parts in terms of the whole. Why? Because that's what Hermetic magic does. One of the principles of Hermeticism, one of the 7 principles of Hermeticism, is called the principle of polarity. It
Right.
says that opposites don't really exist. They're the same in kind and different in degree. So as a matter of fact, opposites aren't opposites. They're 2 of the same thing on opposite ends of the spectrum. In other words, like we just saw, science is a witness
Yeah.
into spirituality. So science and spirituality aren't opposed. Science is just another kind of witness, and you don't even know it, but we know it. So we'll do it consciously. So we'll do it better.
Right.
You being unconscious has caused all these problems, all these inefficiencies, all these harms, all these kids falling behind, all these different things. So your method isn't just blind. It's blind and causing harm for being blind. It's racist, sexist, etc. It could be. So we're conscious, we're aware of the problems you're causing, and we're actually doing the same thing. We're doing spirituality by 2 different ways. Your lens is the scientific method. Our lens is spiritual science, but it's the same thing. That's the dialectical process in action. That's Hermeticism obliterating distinctions. What's postmodernism blurring boundaries? How many different words do I have to use to say the same thing? Is just getting packaged up again and again and again
Right.
for 3,000 years to do wizardry, to give goofs who think that they're reincarnated from the Apostle Paul and Thomas Jefferson power.
Well, and here's the thing. Even for those who are listening who might be thinking, that we're crazy or we're making too much of it, and it's really about money, or they're, cynical, whatever. Let's go there.
Yeah, let's go
Even
there,
if
because
you're
what does the
even if
secret say? The law of
yeah,
attraction. You're going to get rich when you visualize money.
exactly. And even if well, let's say there are people in our government who are, we know this is factual, with ESSER funds, they have been like pouring rivers of money, as you put it, into SEL. That is a fact. That's not, us being paranoid. That is happening. Even
10
if you think
figures.
it,
10
yes,
figures.
10 figures. So even if you think like it's not a cult, it's not satanic, it's not woo woo, whatever, you still have to stop and acknowledge that we are pouring an enormous amount of money into our government schools, but also private schools are doing too, for the purpose of mucking around in kids' emotional lives, okay? In their minds, in their emotions, in their sense of self, in things that have nothing to do with the original mission of education, public or otherwise. And you have to acknowledge that we, the people of the United States of America, were not asked. We were not, there was no informed consent. There was no, we were, the governed have not consented to this.
We were
We've been
tricked into it.
simply told, we were literally tricked into it. We were lied to and told what this would do. Chicago, the city of Chicago, a very large urban district, did some activists who were against SEL took the data across 10 years of SEL and all the costs associated to see if it was evidence-based? Did it fulfill on its promise of improving academic outcomes, improving race relations, all the things it was going to make more peaceful, better, blah, 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 by every single objective metric. So again, leave out the woo if it bothers you. By every objective metric, it failed, colossally failed. Everything in Chicago is worse. Everything is worse. Literacy is down by like ridiculous amount, 70%. They've spent millions of dollars. Race relations are worse than ever. There's violence in the schools. This is factual. Okay.
And then they use it as the excuse. They say, these are the reasons we need more of it.
Now we need
and
more.
What they tell you is that it's
Exactly.
data driven, and they tell you what data driven means isn't that they have data driving it. It's that it's data driven in that it needs to collect data so as it goes so it can figure out how to make itself work, because it knows it doesn't work yet. So it's collecting data, which means it's surveying your kids. It's doing these manipulations and measuring what kind of outcomes they have. They're testing nudge theory on your kids. They're doing all these kinds of things.
Well,
and
we
then,
also know we also know from history, religious cultists, one of the things that is common, there's a common thread throughout history, is they don't exactly go, oops, we were wrong.
No, they said that it was right on another level.
That's correct.
They always say it was right on. The UFO turned around because they saw our faith and blessed us instead of destroying us. That's the Leon Festinger thing. That's how it always works. Cultists don't just like, whoops, we were wrong. And you said millions. No, they've invested billions into this, many billions over the years. And when I say tricked into it, I want your listeners who haven't heard this to know that we were tricked into this through, I mean, we can go down the whole George Bush, start with No Child Left Behind. This started a kind of a reporting mechanism. This turned into Common Core, which was derived from World Core, which came from Robert Mueller at UNESCO and the United Nations, who happened to have derived it from Alice Bailey, but nevertheless. Common Core required a ton more reporting. Let's stay practical and prosaic here. It required a ton more reporting. And then in 2015, as Common Core is kind of faltering, but the reporting mechanisms that teachers are put under are not faltering. They're mandated now. If you want to get all that sweet federal money, it's the only way to get it. They passed the Every Student Succeeds Act. This is an act that looks like, one of these. It's like, it looks like a volume of an old dictionary when they used to have real definitions in them and in print. And it's this huge act. And in it, it mandates that there's reporting on at least one non-academic competency. How did SEL get mandated? That's how. It didn't get mandated. You didn't get a referendum on it. There was no question. There was no vote on SEL. There was, we need one non-academic competency. That got lobbied in by CASEl. And then CASEl had an army of consultants that went out under 100 brand names, wit and wisdom, whatever they are, and sold SEL as something that will satisfy the new requirement. Here, you need a thing. Here's a thing. We already have it ready. In other words, they tricked us into it. And then once a school, which is a bureaucratic entity, implements a thing they've already bought in, they've paid the consultants millions, they're not just the sunk cost deal is real. They're not just going to dump it next year, say, whoops, we wasted $3 million. We still have to satisfy this. And now we're going to go through the search process. They're going to say, this gets the job done. We just won't take it seriously, at which point the thumb screws start getting twisted year after year, tighter and tighter and tighter, until now we have, even in the Stop Woke Act, Section 4 from Florida this year, signed by Governor DeSantis, we have the CASEl 5 written, not explicitly. The words are all there, but it's written in nice little paragraphs and sentences. It would be wonderful to figure out who actually wrote that piece of legislation, because I talked to some Florida legislators and they were like, how did this happen? I was like, you're the legislators. Maybe you should ask whoever wrote the bill. And
you think?
Maybe you should figure out who wrote Section 4 and then ask yourself which consultants you hired to help you with that law, who didn't recognize that they were mainlining the CASEl 5 in Section 4 of that act, because you just, in the biggest humiliation that I can think of in 2022 legislation, the Stop Woke Act in the famously based state of Florida, signed by America's governor, we say Ron DeSantis, contains a mainlining explicitly now of social and emotional learning.
That's right.
And so it's like, holy crap, but they tricked us into it, is how we got here. They deliberately tricked us into it by slowly expanding a reporting mechanism and then creating a consultant army that went out and capitalized upon. The second there's this new requirement nobody knows how to fulfill, we have your answer. You have a problem, we have your solution. Already packaged up. In fact, we have lots of different brand names. So the school district in Michigan that implements it, and the school district in Tennessee that implements it, school district in California that implements it, it won't even sound the same. So nobody will be able to connect the dots. This was a
No.
huge orchestrated plan.
I
This
have
is the
so
only way
many
that that
people
could
tell me,
happen.
this isn't in my district. I'm like, yes, it is.
Yes,
No,
it
we
is.
don't have this. Like, I promise you it is. And
It's in
I mean,
all the districts.
it's in all of them. And they're also using, they just like Alice Bailey or Lucius Trust has all kinds of different, they say, well, Asterix the Christ, and it's all these things too. Asterix SEL, it's all these other things. And they also have ways of approaching all of us, left, right, center, every political persuasion, if you're secular atheist, if you're, right-wing Christian, it doesn't matter. The people behind this stuff have packaged it in such a way that makes you think they hear you or they get you or they understand you. And one of the I think this one might be a misstep though. One of the things they've done is they're trying to leverage the word democracy. And we hear it all the time in the news. We hear, our democracy, our democracy, our democracy. Well, look at the Fetzer Institute, what they've got going on over here. Democracy that unites us. Remember, if you've just joined us, John Fetzer, the guy, would put his seed money, huge seed money, what was it, 20 million
200
or
million.
200 million, okay,
And let's
into,
please call him his right name, Thomas Jefferson.
I'm sorry, Thomas
Jefferson.
Archangel Michael, whatever we're calling him now. This guy, okay, so his institute has democracy that unites us, healing the heart of U.S. democracy. So they're using this term when we are not a democracy. But remember the concept of wholeness? We can't, if we're a republic, ooh, that's like parts. That's not whole. But democracy is a mob. I mean, really it is. The majority rules, the whole. We got to get everyone on board. We got to get the majority to define what we're doing and so forth. You talked in your podcast about, I believe, about how this ultimately creates the desire from below. It creates the demand rather from below, from the kids as they grow to become that mob that says, we demand the thing, the new world, the new age, the new culture, the new thing. And that's part of why this is happening. And I have personally sat in on webinars and professional development, things for teachers where they explicitly state that their goal, it's very Freudian too, that their goal is to teach the children so they will rise up and demand the new world. The new world order, demand, and they don't call it the new world order. What they call it is, equitable spaces and the inclusive, sustainable society, whatever they call it. This democracy thing is just a word that they think will appeal to more people than new world order. But it's the same thing. It's a mob.
I'm looking on the Lucius Trust website. They have a bunch of articles about democracy too, of course. I like this line right here where they're talking about it. This is from 2008, the meaning of democracy. It says, in ancient Greece, the term idiotic signifies one who is concerned only with his own private affairs, being indifferent to public concerns. And it's like, oh, okay. Like, I don't know if that's etymologically true or not, but you can see what they're doing. But the whole thing is, democracy ideally is where every single person should be one of the rulers, a member of the group, which is the collective ruler of their country. There's blah, 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 democracy, democracy, democracy. We also already saw how the Soviets abuse the word democracy in the same way that the Chinese and the Soviets abuse the word the people. The people are only the people who support the thing. Otherwise, you're part of the problem. You're not part of the people. In the Hermetic literature, there are the people who have inherited the mind of God with the nous, as they say, with the mind, the divine intellect, and there are people who haven't. And they have different principles, different rules. They get to have a double standard of good and bad. They know versus other people who don't. But when you come to democracy, for people that think in this kind of elitist philosopher king kind of way, there are only certain people who are actually the people. Everybody else is not part of the people. If you're along with the totalitarian program, if you're in the cult, you're a people. If you're not a people. You're not a person at all. And so what do you have? You have People's Democratic Republic of Korea, right? People's, okay, who are the people? Only the people who support it. democratic,
Yeah.
meaning that only they get to vote, but their vote
Yeah.
supposedly counts, and blah, blah, blah. So people's democracy means that it's a democracy only of the people who count as people, but the only people who count as people are the people who support the regime.
Right.
And so a people's democracy, People's Democratic Republic of Korea, for example, a people's democracy is what Lenin referred to as the kind of, he literally referred to it in State and Revolution as the type of democracy that exists under the dictatorship of the proletariat, which he
Right.
said explicitly elevates the voices of the people who count and suppresses the voices we don't want to hear. Which is, if you're deplorable, maybe you should be disenfranchised. MAGA needs to be disenfranchised.
They would
Yada,
like
yada,
to
yada.
get to that point, and we've, parents who are fighting this stuff have been called domestic terrorists.
And you
I
see
wanna
that though in the education with the SEL too. The kids
Yeah.
are being asked to talk about Donald Trump and how he's so dangerous and all this
It's in math
crazy stuff.
problems.
Yeah.
It's in math problems, it's in science experiments, it's in, their social studies, it's in everything. I do wanna call attention, remember I said that
Yeah.
here we were on Lucius Trust, and we got down to the futures of education, learning to become. So I went and I clicked on it. Oh, look at that.
It goes to UNESCO.
What's that? Oh, wow. Futures of Education, UNESCO, a global initiative to reimagine how knowledge and learning can shape the future of humanity and the planet.
A new social contract, as a matter of fact, for that. A new social
Yes,
contract.
a new social contract.
Which
And
is what
it's
Klaus Schwab calls for explicitly and repeatedly throughout his 2022 book, The Great Narrative for a Better Future.
right.
It's the same
Yes.
thing. These are all the same picture. Help.
And they say things like thinking together so we can act together to make the futures we want. The people involved with this stuff, all the way back to Fetzer and Bailey, and even the founders of CASEl, they all do this trick. It's the 4 out of 5 dentist trick, isn't it? It's the woman saying, parents want this. Parents, parents are calling for this. Etc. Teachers want this. They love to speak for other people who were never asked. I've
Mhm.
spoken to teachers. I've spoken to other parents. I'm like, did I miss the memo? Did you
Yeah,
guys
the
miss the memo? Did
stakeholders.
you get the memo asking? Like, I wasn't asked. I
No.
was told we had to do this.
Nobody polled me.
Right.
Well, can you do a Kamala Harris impression? Because you should reread The Green Box doing your Kamala impression. Thinking together
Yes.
so that we can act together
Thinking
to make the
together.
futures we want together.
Yes.
When we came
exactly.
together to think together so we could act together to make the future together that we
As the
wanted
group
together.
thinks. As the group thinks.
Together.
Yes. As below, so above, or as above, so, but whatever
That's
it is.
right. Yeah. Well, it's both. It's both actually.
Yeah.
It is the snake eating its own tail. As above, so below. As below, so above. That's the first principle or second principle of Hermeticism. It's called the principle of correspondence. So that which is on a higher spiritual level corresponds to that which is below. So the higher level influences the lower, but the lower level in turn influences the higher. Marx called these things praxis. That's as below, so above, an inversion of praxis, as above, so below, or socialization. So you do activism to transform the social structure. The social structure conditions you through socialization, as above, so below, as below, so above, around and around and around.
And that is precisely what's happening. And they do, when I say they, I mean educators from the Department of Education on down, in the positions where they dictate what's happening, pedagogy, etc. They make no bones about it. They say,
do you have that image, by the way?
Which
that
one?
image that you put on Twitter earlier? Can you pull that up? The image of the Theosophical Society.
Yes, let me get that. Let me
because I just did a talk recently in Phoenix, like 2 weeks ago, where I showed the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail, and I said, "This is their cross. You have to understand this symbol is their cross. The snake eating its own tail is their cross."
That is correct. Hang on 1 second.
And
Here
then
it is.
we have Alice Bailey Helena Blavatsky has her Theosophical Society symbol is the snake eating its own tail. So there it is.
Exactly.
I always ask people, when they think of this as a philosophical image, it's like, what happens when the snake finishes its meal, supposing that it could? What would be left?
Yeah.
Nothing, right? It's destruction. Exactly. But then, there's that kind of awkward symbol there at the top.
Awkward.
Right?
Very
little
awkward.
Little awkward, big awkward, major awkward. Why is that there? Why is it awkward? Turns out that the person who made that symbol super awkward, instead of a symbol of good luck from the East, which it is, happened to have got the crazy idea and all of his weird race occult ideology from
Blavatsky.
Helena Blavatsky.
Yes.
Helena Blavatsky, and it's repeated explicitly in the Education in the New Age book by Alice Bailey, came with the idea of the 5 root races, and their race is actually defined in terms of spiritual ascension, but they're very quick to point out that there's no African has very high of ascension or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And only so many Asians, they only get to the 4th level. And then as you read in Mein Kampf, it's the Teutonic people and the Anglos and the Saxons and the Caucasians have the highest proportion of people that are reaching the 5th root race, which is called Aryan. Which has that symbol there.
They're the occultists, right? They're the mystics or whatever they are.
And so here we are with Helena Blavatsky importing the symbol and the concept of the superiority of an Aryan race, saying that it's very rare outside of people who happen to look different than she does. She's German and Russian in her heritage and lived most of her life in London. So I'm going to go out on a limb and guess she's pretty white.
Yeah, but she's not what you think she's going to look like. You know how like Hitler, Mr. like Aryan race, whatever, and he looks like he doesn't look like it at all. Well, same with Helena Blavatsky. Let me show you this chick because she is not pretty. Sorry. I went to look for her because I was like, what does this woman look like?
Yeah,
she is white. She is white, but
she looks like somebody that you're gonna like if you watched Big as a kid, like that's like at the carnival where Zoltar the machine is.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, now
that's a very dark picture of her. She might have been beautiful in some other life. I don't know, but I'm saying this isn't what I think of when I think of Aryan princess.
No, and so they say though that's a spiritual designation, right?
I see.
It's a spiritual designation of people. And so with her other disciple Margaret Sanger creating Planned Parenthood, why are we planning parenthood? Well, Alice Bailey tells us why we're planning parenthood in this exact book. And she says we have to plan parenthood specifically because there aren't enough high quality souls ready to ascend for the number of babies being made. In other words, we're importing inferior souls. So into the age of Aquarius, we have this problem that we have some people who are 3rd root race, in other words, Lemurians, who are humans made for work, but they have human minds and human souls. The ones below that, 1st and 2nd, are very animalish, not so good in terms of being human all the way. Then the 4th root race are the Atlanteans from Atlantis, and they are the intellectuals and the mystics. And then you have the highest spiritual ascension people, and those are the Aryans. And it is their duty to usher us out of the 4th spiritual age at the age of Pisces into the 5th spiritual age for the age of Aquarius. That's going to be called the etheric age. So it turns out in Hermeticism, there are 7 planes of the world, of this world. There are actually an 8th and a 9th above this. And in the 7 planes of this world, they are in order: mineral at the bottom, vegetable above that, animal above that, human above that, etheric, astral, spirit. And what's Hegel's book? Phenomenology of Spirit. How do you get back to spirit? Okay, there you go. But so we're supposed to ascend from the human plane that we finally reached. We have a few people from the 5th level who are Aryans who are going to usher us as a species into the 5th plane. Hitler's project was to create the master race that would be able to do it in sufficient numbers and with sufficient power. That was his actual project. So he decided inferior races had to be purged from his breeding project. And that went badly, as we recall.
A little bit.
Understatement sometimes helps as a form of dark humor.
We've got research assistants in the crowd here. Look what else has been found. This is courtesy of the Fetzer Institute.
Again. Democratic values, virtues, and spiritual practice. Common good, freedom, independence, e pluribus unum. Out of many, one. Equality, justice for all, rule of law, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. To cultivate all these virtues. Oh, those are the democratic values, and here are the virtues, which are actually there's only one virtue, which is do what the overlords tell you.
Yeah, pretty much. We need spiritual practices. I knew it was coming.
Yep.
It had to be coming. We have to have
compassion. Compassion.
These people are going to turn me into a monster. I'm serious. They're going to turn me into somebody who's like, yeah, I got none of that.
I mean, this page is like buzzword bingo for like all of the things that they talk about: compassion, hope. I'm just kind of going down the list: imagination, kindness,
transformation,
joy, openness, transformation, of course, unity. These are the words that they use for everything.
Listening.
Justice.
Listening. We're listening now.
You. Why is you one of the words? A spiritual practice of you? That's going to take some thinking
But it's
about, and
never
it's going to be
you.
horrifying when you
It's
figure it out.
others. It's never you. It's only you if you can claim some kind of entitlement to somebody else's them.
That's
Like, it's
right.
not you don't matter unless you align with the correct groups. All of this is group collectivism garbage, and so that's one. That was at the Fetzer Institute, and then this was also discovered: sharing spiritual heritage, convening dialogue, and field building. This is also there. Helping that, again, this is really important because when you go
Practicing the world we want to create.
So there's that. I wonder what that's all about. Oh, diverse leaders and seekers are eagerly pursuing the next phase.
Yeah.
That they're telling you. Contemplative experience is at the core of this task, embodying the work itself through spirituality, spiritually diverse practices, et cetera, et cetera. And then they talk about how do we practice the world we seek to create, honoring lineage, blah, blah. Okay. Now, why does this, again, let's go back to CASEl. Okay. Oh, wait, look at that. Oh, it's not showing. I'm sorry. I have to switch screens. I have to get to the proper screen because when we go to CASEl's website, what do we see? Oh, yes, the Fetzer
Fetzer
Institute.
Institute. Oh, hi guys.
It's right
How
there.
weird.
Why would why would this be one of their projects? Now, somebody might say, well, they're just giving money to something they agree with and they believe in. And I'm like, okay, but why? The
Why were they born
entire
there too?
purpose of the Fetzer Institute is to combine science and spirituality into one. It is to create this new world, this new age. It is to change the world as they see it. They mean it. They're not joking around. Go read their website. They're deadly serious and they have a lot of money. Well, there you go. And of course, we also have the Oak Foundation. Now, some of you may not be familiar with the Oak Foundation, but if you go to it, you will find that it is very similar, minus the spirituality, but we get these, issues of global social and environmental concern. We're talking about, sisterhoods of women. And then if you go to, these are the programs they have. But when you look at their values, mission, and history, it's all about others, promoting social justice. So these are the people funding SEL as it is taught in American schools. CASEl is the standard. If you go to the Department of Education right now and you look at how people get grant money into their district from ESSER funds, you will see that CASEL standard, you can choose a different brand name. You can choose Second Step, you can choose DESA, you can choose one of these other, but their program or whatever you purchase must align with the CASEl 5.
You'll see that image, that circle with the different
That
colors
is
on it.
that is correct.
That
It
image
is there.
on all of them. And so you asked me earlier, what do you think the science of right human relations is? And it's like all that crap that looks exactly the same on all these websites. That's the science of right human relations.
That's
whatever that adds up to. And that's what social emotional learning is equipped with. And so what the F is social emotional learning, and why the F is it in our schools? It's not like it's just kind of religious instruction. This is deep religion, in a religion people don't recognize.
No. And you brought up something very important in the podcast, which, before we go, I want to mention it because you said that CASEl may already be on the chopping block. In other words, there's already a push to go to something called culturally affirming SEL. Now, it looks real similar. There's a wheel. So you're like, okay, Deb, what's the difference? Well, we're getting more in your face about these concepts: agency and voice, social awareness, relationship nurturing, social responsibility, and self-awareness. And when you dig deeper into the wheel, you have many more words that align with Alice Bailey, John Fetzer, Helena Blavatsky, all of these. You'll see the same vocabulary. And where's the push coming from, or how is that manifesting? Well, I also found this. This is a change.org petition. It's not got all the signatures, but it's coming out of, this guy is a big proponent of it, Byron McClure. We will probably end up knowing his name the way we know Ibram X. Kendi and other names. But Racial equity, justice, and culturally affirming practices must be at the core of SEL.
And
And
it says
this,
George Floyd, so it must be right.
right. And he actually calls them lynchings. So he lists off all the people, including Michael Brown, and says that they were lynched, and says, as the founder of Lessons for SEL, I am calling for action to fully commit to social emotional learning practices that are culturally affirming across the country. I'm urging the racial equity, justice, and culturally affirming practices be at the core of SEL. This is a petition to CASEl.
He's only urging them. That's nice. I actually found out about the culturally affirming SEL push in a document that was sent to me. That was actually sent. It is the proposal document that was sent to Biden's Department of Education. I have double checked on the Biden Department of Education website. It's that particular document I did not look very hard for, but I didn't find. But culturally affirming SEL is already there all over the current DOE website. And so culturally, this document though actually has a page in it where in boldface cartoon print, like they always use, it says that they don't ask for culturally affirming SEL. First of all, it says that CASEl and transformative SEL, which is already extremely radically critically conscious Marxist consciousness raising, they say it's a good first step. But then a few pages down further, they actually have this page in this document where they say that they have the demands, not the requests, not the urging, the demands of culturally affirming social emotional learning. And that it says in boldface print that those are derived directly from the 1967 Black Panthers Party demands. So this is extraordinarily radical at that point. We're now looping in Black liberationism and Black radical decolonization theories. So I'm decided it's, I guess, high time I go read Frantz Fanon again. And so I'm reading this, the father of the decolonization project, who sees decolonization as necessarily incorporating violence, and that the rebirth of the colonized person into a human being takes place through murdering a colonizer. He actually says those words explicitly.
Right.
When the colonized person murders a colonizer, there are two things. There is a dead colonizer and there's a reborn man that survives who knows his humanity for the first time and feels it under his feet in his nation. And so it's like, woof, rebirth through murder. This is dark. So I've got some podcasts to plan about those issues, but this culturally affirming thing already is explicitly being pushed for very hard. The activists are working very hard at it. The Department of Education under Joseph Biden has already taken it up, and it calls CASEl a good first step. It wants to, of course, push in on CASEl's market. The grifters are always eating each other. The snake eating its own tail applies in that way as well. But it also says that transformative social emotional learning is only a good first step. This is something, transformative social emotional learning is so new that it's not even in the handbook of social emotional learning research and practice from
and
2016.
it's step 4 from where they started. They actually did start with just like, we'll pull kids out as for behavioral, kids with behavior problems.
Before that was whole child education.
Yeah.
From James Comer. And then they started with, let's do these kind of experience. There's the whole thing again, right? But let's do these kind of things where we're going to pull kids out. We'll do it with a personal responsibility model. Then it became civic responsibility, civic duty, civic participation. That's the word I was looking for, participation. Then it became transformative. And now it's becoming culturally affirming. And if you think that that is going to stop, or if this slope isn't slippery, then you aren't paying attention. It will continue. The wheel will continue to grind until what you have is full out science of right human relations woven into every subject. It would be extraordinarily radical programming. And I say programming as a double meaning programming in the type of the programming at the school, and programming as in programming your children like little robots that are meant to be the next Red Guard.
That's right. And I mean, because we have history of the Red Guard or the brown shirts or the, pick something, right? That we know that these efforts can be successful. So it's not, as crazy as what we're saying sounds, it is dangerous. Even if they weren't able to turn our kids into little Red Guard, they are violating our children's rights every single day. They're violating our rights as parents. They're stealing our money. They're doing something that we didn't ask them to do. We don't want them to do. And if we try to get them to stop, we're called the problem. That should already raise red flags. Even if you think it's like there might be a softer, gentler version of SEL that wouldn't be so bad, you've got to have a problem with the way they're going about this. Parents should be able to say, you've gone too far. This is not okay. I need a reason why you're collecting all this data and not be called terrorists. So, at wherever you are with us on the spectrum of, having a heart, whether it's having a heart condition like James or me having mini strokes because of this, because I had one last year. If you're over here with us and like, this is absolutely as bad as we say it is, and we need to let our hair on fire and stop it, or you're just over here going, God, our kids can't do math and read properly anymore because they're spending all this time meditating and talking about their feelings. I don't care. Even if you're here, you should be fighting this because it's costing hundreds of billions of dollars and your kids are getting dumber. So, what's your line? What is the line that has to be crossed before you say, yeah, I think we need to stop doing this? Because where does it go next? If you're only over here and the kids are not learning academically, what do you think they're gonna get to where James and I are telling you they're gonna get to if you don't think they're already there? I think they're already there. But I know I'm not going to persuade everybody in one podcast or even in listening to yours. I just
think, like 300 podcasts. I was going to say,
or like 300 podcasts or whatever. But I definitely hope that all of you here today or listening on the replay will listen to the full podcast, because James reads so much more than he could read today on this show, and goes into so much more depth, connecting these dots that I didn't need to go do the dot connecting myself. I believed him, but I did it, like I said, so I could bring this stuff up during the show and show you these things. It's there. I encourage you to go look for yourself. I encourage you to listen to the podcast. Is there anything else you suggest that people do or look at, or, to inform themselves about this?
I mean, I think you should probably, if you think that this might be serious, you should look into these organizations or these books yourself. You should go, for example, to the UNESCO website and notice that if you go to the UNESCO documents repository, the Education in the New Age is listed there as one of the resources that they offer.
That's absolutely right. Yep.
You should wonder why that is. You don't have to make any conclusions. I wonder why that is. I would have hid my tracks better than that. Just saying. You should go read some of the stuff on the John Fetzer Spiritual Library. Read some of the stuff on their website. Right. Follow, like you did, like Deb did here on the show, follow some of the links and see, oh my gosh, it's the same kind of stuff. Oh my gosh, it's the same kind of stuff. Go to their websites and do keyword searches for things like these buzzwords: transform, democracy, humanize, all these kinds of words. Freire, see if Freire pops up. I don't know if he does or not, probably not much. But go check these things out. If you want to, pick up a couple of Alice Bailey's books or pick up some of Helena Blavatsky's books and read those. Start on their Wikipedia entries before they scrub them tomorrow after this has been exposed to see what they say.
They don't even hide it, guys. It literally says right here, the aim. This initiative, remember, this is the Futures of Education Initiative. UNESCO is incredibly powerful in terms of how we are educating our kids here in America.
And didn't we just sign up officially for it again?
Yes, we did.
Didn't Joe Biden just sign up for it again? Yeah, okay.
Absolutely, yes.
So we're a member of it again.
Yes, now. That humongous, like 4,000 page omnibus bill includes just an insane amount of money, billions of dollars for this. This initiative aims to mobilize the many rich ways of being and knowing, whatever that means, in order to leverage humanity's collective intelligence. As if that's a thing. It relies on a broad, open process of co-construction, you'll hear that in your kids' schools, that involves youth, educators, civil society, governments, business, and other stakeholders, whoever they are. One central piece of the work was guided by a high-level international commission of thought leaders from diverse fields and different regions of the world. In November 2021, the commission published its report, Reimagining Our Futures Together, a new social contract for education, which presents a forward-looking vision of what education and learning might yet become and allow us individually and collectively to become. So that ambiguous, doesn't really explain anything gobbledygook is what we're spending billions of dollars on. And the people who wrote it, the people who do know what it means, are telling our schools how to educate our kids. And I mean, we need to demand definitions of terms and not just allow people to go forward with, well, they must be smarter than me. And I don't, okay, I guess it's probably okay because I don't understand. And if you think that school choice is going to save you, James, you
Yeah,
want to
that's
touch
not going to
that
happen.
before we leave?
Yeah, very simply. I also want to read something real quick, just since
Okay.
you brought that word up. But I'll say the school choice thing first. I've got this down to a sentence, so it's very easy. There's no such thing as school choice in a public-private partnership. Even if you believe in whatever the brand name of school choice represents, which I know you don't, and I am strongly skeptical of on its face, there is no such thing as school choice. There's no market in a public-private partnership. When the public sector and private sector are working together to achieve the same goals and playing off one another to do it, you're not opening up a marketplace where choice is going to make differences, where people are going to be able to vote with your feet. You're going to be able to step into a frying pan or into a fire. Those are going to be your two choices. And there are myriad reasons, without opening the whole school choice can of worms too far,
Right.
why we have to be extremely concerned. Are they going to, like, how are you going to start a school, except a small one-off, which is going to be expensive, and maybe they'll let a few of them happen, who cares, right? But how are you going to start like a franchise model of charter schools that's not ESG compliant? How are you going to get the startup loan? How are you going to get the financing? How are you going to pay for any of this? What are you going to do with it when you get it? Well, the cost cut, you're probably going to gather data and sell it because it's the most valuable thing in the world. All the same stuff is going to happen. But now you think you're dodging the woke nightmare. They could even make these schools anti-woke, because the point is actually, so you're going to go to them like crazy, tank the public schools, tank the existing private schools, because they're going to be cheaper, they're going to be anti-woke, and what they really are is gathering all the data necessary to make sure that your kids come out just as anti-America, just as global citizen, just as whatever as they need. They don't care about the necessary little pieces here and there. So you're not escaping it. Elite private schools serve the most elite universities. Do you think they're going to de-woke anytime soon? No. So of course they're going to have woke private schools. So school choice isn't going to solve this problem until we in the hypothetical sense of what you think the word means. Creating a genuine market for schooling could solve or help solve this problem. It's a true component to the problem when there's not a public-private partnership ruling over everything. But since you brought up the gobbledygook and the co-constructing word, right? And you're going to hear that. Let me read to you from my favorite academic paper of all this month, which is the Drag Queen Story Hour paper, Drag Pedagogy. This is an interesting section, so I'm going to read a little over a paragraph here so that you have the context of why it's saying this. So drag may offer some insights into how educators might support a practice of strategic defiance. They're going to practice teaching your kids to be strategically defiant. Isn't that what you want out of your kids' school? Yeah. In the moments when a child interrupts, a queen might respond to them as she would a heckler at a show. So the Drag Queen Story Hour facilitator, a groomer clown, is going to heckle your kids. That's what you're sending them to. Isn't that fun? Rather than punishing a child by reprimanding or removing them, a queen is more likely to try to engage the child's energy and use it to fuel her performance. Okay, so a narcissistic foil. That's great for your child's mental health. As drag artist Taylor Mack insists, when an audience member, quote, is threatening to take the story away from the storyteller, then you have to incorporate them into the story at all costs, meaning the cost might include your child's well-being. That's the end of the quote. That's why the best queens engage their hecklers, turning the butt of the joke around, or better yet, forming a sense of solidarity between the performer and heckler against the outside world. That would be you, mom. The drag queen is going to bond with your child against you. Many young students like hecklers, because young students and hecklers are the same. Many young students like hecklers interrupt or act out because they are genuinely curious and excited, don't fully understand something, or feel excluded and are looking for a way to participate. Now listen to this. By playfully responding to and incorporating children's feedback rather than dismissing it, teachers might invite their students into co-constructing the classroom environment. There's your co-constructing. In a broader context, fostering collective unruliness. So you're going to have better behavior through these programs. Fostering collective unruliness also helps children to understand that they can have a hand in changing their environment. That's the Drag Queen Story Hour paper. You're hearing the same language, you're hearing the same ideas, and what, of course, is going to be the thing that's going to either bring this in front of them or then deal with the fallout after it comes is the social emotional learning incorporation that they're going to deal with. Just like how the UNESCO has a document out called SEL for SDGs that explains that social emotional learning should be used to brainwash kids into achieving the sustainable development goals of Agenda 2030. That's literally what it says. It also points out that that's because, or one of the reasons is because social emotional learning is ideal for learning, they're helping children manage cognitive dissonance. When something's happening in the classroom environment that shouldn't be, like a drag queen, like gender affirming care, etc., like all of the lessons being reframed in terms of equity or global citizenship or inclusion or sustainability. When something's happening that shouldn't be, social emotional learning is actually a set of sophisticated psychological and sociological or social work tools to overcome the resistance and get your kids to be more resilient, where resilience is the opposite of fragility, like white fragility, which is rejecting the CRT advance into your child's mind. And so you start to piece together how they use these words and how they what they say. You don't even have to go to the drag queen story hour, but you can, to see that all of this is happening. All of this is part and parcel with the same kind of stuff. When I went through on Twitter, I did a gigantic mega thread on this paper this just last couple of days. Again, I've did it as a podcast before. I've seen new things now, and I did it as a gigantic thread. And I actually point out there's a section in this paper where I think it's absolutely clear that drag queen story hour operates as an initiation rite into queer Gnosticism. So into this mystical, esoteric religion focused on queerness and the building of the divine hermaphrodite. Trans people are sacred. We just heard that from the Shakespeare's Globe Theater with the performance of I, Joan. The divine hermaphrodite has to be rebuilt. The person who it becomes not just begotten, but self-begetting. They become their own Christ because they develop a Christ consciousness. To become that person, you have to be initiated into the queer mysteries. And the Drag Queen Story Hour program is an initiation into queer mysteries. SEL is the thing that you use to facilitate the cult conversion after the initiation. This is sick.
It is also sick, and that is what causes the cognitive dissonance.
That's what causes heart palpitations. And
yeah, but most people hear this or they listen to us talking, and they're like, "These people are nuts."
Like, I just spent like 3 months. Like, the people are going to think I'm nuts. I can't even talk about this.
Yeah,
I finally hit the line, the thing I can't say.
Exactly.
That's what I thought for months. And I was like, no, I got to say it. Of course I'm going to say it.
Well, and you saw what happened as soon as I listened to your podcast. I'm all like, satanic. It's satanic. It's satanic. I'm like telling everybody. Like, they're going to think I'm crazy because I'm agnostic. You know, I'm an atheist basically. Yeah. And so I don't, but I still look at this and I go, nope, that's satanic. Nope. Like, it's
I don't know what that word means, but it means this.
It means this. It is, I don't know what it means like spiritually, but I know what it means technically. And when I hear phrases like as above, so below, as below, so above, I'm like, yeah, that would be Satan. Like that's demon. That's the stuff that the Christians usually react to. And I know this is not exactly friendly to Jews either. The Abrahamic faiths are not, they are considered to be less evolved, right, James? They're
less evolved is the usual presentation.
That's usually how they talk about it, because they feel like they're more evolved because it's this one thing. But I hope
Jesus got almost as far as John Fetzer down the road. Is basically their attitude.
Oh yeah, poor
Jesus got pretty far, but almost John Fetzer knows there's a lot more to the story.
John Fetzer was Thomas Jefferson, so he got to
live. The Apostle Paul,
who
had a direct encounter with Jesus, if we believe the New Testament. So here we are.
No matter how you slice it, it comes up broken children. It comes up broken children. So even if I can sit here and intellectually know that they won't be successful at their goal, okay, because they never are. Mao wasn't successful. Hitler wasn't successful. They never are successful at the thing they claim they're setting out to do. But they're remarkably successful at other things. They're remarkably successful at destroying human beings, destroying societies, destroying civilizations, destroying knowledge, and pushing us backwards. And that's what I see happening. I mean, I still tutor kids. I see kids who are allegedly honor students coming to me to write their college essays, and I want to cry, because what they think is good writing, and the way that they're able to take criticism is virtually non-existent. I have to tiptoe around to correct their work or give them feedback or whatever because they've been told they're fabulous. They're applying to a whole long list of Ivy League schools, and I'm sitting there like, okay, have fun with that. Like, I mean, they might even get in based on the new standards, but I just we are we are telling children they're fabulous, they're marvelous, they're wonderful, they're amazing, they're special, they're all these things. And if the real world continues to operate at all like the real world, which means not John Fetzer's world, not Alice Bailey's world, but the actual real world where you have to feed yourself and put a roof over your head and things have to, actually move to go places. Um, they're in for a very rude awakening. And what concerns me is what are they going to do when that happens? What I know what's going to happen to us. I mean, I might be dead and buried by that time, but they're not going to be very happy with us adults because we let it happen. We let it happen. I actually met children whose parents, they got through, they were adults, etc. Their parents sent them to these schools and they realized they weren't prepared. And even though their parents thought, well, I didn't have a choice, I sent you to the school and whatever, they blame the parents. They blame their parents. Even if they also blame their teachers, they still blame their parents. They said, why did you let them? Why did you do this? If God forbid our kids wake up and realize that they were abused in this way. So
Yeah.
you can sit at home and say like, well, I don't have a choice and I don't want to say anything. People think I'm crazy. Okay, but what if your kid figures it out before you do? Then what do you do?
Your kid will be crazy by the time that happens. So best of luck with your kid.
Yeah, either they're going to believe this stuff, in which case you're not going to be in a good place, or they're going to not believe it. They're going to wake up and say like, why did you make me waste my childhood listening to crazy people? And now I don't know anything and I can't function and I can't do the things I need to do. In either case, the parents are left, on the short end. And so
Well,
I
you have
guess,
to understand, mommy didn't want to have an uncomfortable conversation with the neighbor. Mommy didn't want to get kicked out of her knitting club or whatever it is.
yeah. Yeah, or kicked off of Facebook or, go to Facebook jail or just like you said, it's more likely mommy didn't want to explain to her mother-in-law why, she pulled you out of the school or whatever, or how to fight with the teacher. Now, I don't mean to belittle it. There are some parents who are in situations where there is some very real retribution going on. They lose jobs.
No,
I
of
mean,
course.
really bad things are happening. So part of why I encourage people to leave quietly is, rather than trying to fight this like head on, is if you see this level of crazy in your school, I don't think you can fight it head on. I think that's when you have to like just back away slowly, take your kid and like hope for the best. But if you're ahead of it, if your school's just now dabbling in SEL and they're like, oh, it's going to be great. And they're all going to meditate every day. And we're going to do some surveys. Speak now before it's too late, because you can't just passively sit there and say, I'll just watch from the sidelines. It'll be fine.
Yeah, this is religious instruction into a gigantic, goofy cult that people are only beginning to recognize, and they've been doing it for a while. Ultimately, if the U.S. is robust enough to do it, the First Amendment will put a thunderbolt into this, and it really should be our kind of directed goal to make that happen.
Who
To
can make that
facilitate that.
happen? How can we
Well,
do
a
that?
really, really sharp conservative civil rights lawyer or First Amendment lawyer who understands the nature of the thing, and um, they understand the Establishment Clause, who then finds a plaintiff who has standing, which is virtually anybody now that has a kid in school, because it's happening everywhere, who's willing to take the case and bear the slings and arrows, whether it's an individual or whether it's a class action. That probably ends up getting decided at the Supreme Court, but that had better be done in a way that's intelligent and strategic and has its ducks in a row, so that when the religious argument about this is made before the court sees quite clearly what is going on and sees quite clearly that it is a grotesque violation of the First Amendment, and that the federal government, through the Department of Education, owes many decades, or at least a couple of decades, of restitution and reparation for the damage that they've been doing by violating the First Amendment in this way. I mean, this is what it does it take to have that happen. It takes the lawyer, it takes the plaintiff, it takes having the argument tight enough, which we are helping to create the beginning part of, so that when those things come together and sit before the court slaps that gavel down, and
Right.
the final opinion says no more.
Well, I hope that comes to pass, because that's the only, I can't think of any incremental change that would fix it. I think it has to come from the top.
I mean, there is the fact of the matter is, if that starts gaining enough momentum, that could happen at the state level, of course, before it happens at the federal level.
Sure.
If momentum starts happening in that direction, we're not dealing with the most courageous people in the world. We're dealing with zealots that tend to run away when the light shines on them. So zealot was a word, so I don't use dehumanizing language. That they run away when the light shines on them. So if this were to start getting serious momentum, you're going to start seeing some massive adjustments, because they are going to know they're in trouble once they start to realize they're in trouble. So it could be actually a very small court victory that sends a earthquake through the program.
You don't think they would just change the name of it? I mean, we've seen.
They'll try. They will try.
Because we've seen victories in the critical race theory thing, and they just changed the language. They just
Yeah,
changed the
I mean,
wording,
social
and
emotional learning, though, is such a huge programming push.
it's true.
They've invested so much money in it, transforming, and they've got competency areas and all of this stuff. It's not as amorphous as CRT, where they can do that. This is a lot of very specific stuff that would all have to be rebranded. So at the very least, it's going to cost them a tremendous amount of resources to rebrand and to rethink these things. And it depends on how all of that, whether it's a lawsuit or whatever, ends up being framed and what it ends up identifying. But that also requires, you're like, well, what am I going to do as an everyday person? It means you need to be talking to people that you know, because in essence, judges need to be persuaded that when this case comes before them at whatever level, that they need to take this seriously. They need to weigh this case. They need to not just, because the first thing that happens when somebody files a lawsuit is it's going to be a motion to dismiss. It always happens.
Right.
And so if the judge just kicks it out of court, you're stuck. That's it. And so you need judges who are aware enough to realize that, no, there is a real religious liberties question here that's not so simple as, oh, Christians are being infringed upon by pronouns. It's which is a serious issue anyway, but this is, that's like the ones category to the millions category in terms of differences in seriousness that we're dealing with here. And people won't immediately see it. Like we've said repeatedly, we sound crazy. We suffered health consequences realizing that we're going to sound crazy, just to point this out. And what kept, like, just to remind people, or I guess to tell you again, what actually encouraged me and pushed me over the edge to start talking about this, besides crossing my T's and dotting most of my I's, was that so much of it can just be verified in 10 minutes. That won't last. A lot of it will get scrubbed when this starts getting talked about off the internet. But for the moment, so much of this stuff can be, I mean, you had sleuths online currently watching live, finding more depth.
Yeah, they're like, just like, I'm getting messages in my DMs going, I dove into the Fetzer site. I found this.
It's all there.
I'm sure if you spend another 20 minutes, you'd find more. And the key thing, guys, is do side-by-side comparisons. I did it the other day with the Lucis Trust and CASEl, Lucis Trust and Columbia University Teacher College, Lucis Trust in the UN and UNESCO, whatever. And it's all the same words. So as tempted as you might be to say, well, so some crackpots want to fund SEL, big deal. It is a big deal. People don't give, whether it's Bill Gates or Fetzer, they don't give millions of dollars in grant money to organizations they don't agree with, they don't align with, that won't take influence from them. If you are on the receiving end of a grant, you've gotten grant money in the past, haven't you, James?
No,
never actually. Even. Oh, okay.
Not even when I was in the university.
But you know people who have, right?
Yes, of course. I have never taken a grant, actually.
Okay.
So, I'm a bad grifter, by the way.
Good. So we've learned something. Right? I wouldn't fault you if you taken like a grant for some mathematics thing. I mean, like, it's happened, but I'm just saying, like, people who have been on the receiving end of grants, and the grantor has some pull. They don't just go, here's some money, go do what you want.
I guess technically I have taken one then that I think about it. I don't know how it works. It's a mysterious case. The grievance studies affair, I was granted money to do that. But one of the agreements, one of the points of agreement that we made before we started that, before we actually made that agreement functional, was that they would have absolutely no input or say whatsoever. In fact, I had no communication with them for like the first 8 months. And then it was like, I called them. Yeah, stuff's still going on. What's happened? Well, a few things have happened. Okay. What do you think we should do? We don't answer that question. Sorry. All right. See you next month or whatever. And so it was entirely by agreement, a hands-off agreement. We were left to hang ourselves with the rope they gave us if we couldn't pull it off. But I mean, I'll disclose the amount. Even that was maybe people want to know this. I don't know. I got paid $70,000 to do that. $70,000. That's it.
Right.
I worked every day, every minute I was awake for $70,000 for 15 months.
Yeah. But I mean, look what it showed. If you're not familiar with the grievance studies thing, that's you look it up, because
so other people want to know who paid me. I don't know. I actually don't know. That's also part of the agreement, is that I don't know. I can't find out. I can't be told. I don't know.
It's fascinating, but it is
dark
a contract.
Money, apparently.
Grant money. It grants our contracts, and all those names that we showed you, Allstate, Oak, blah blah blah, Fetzer. They don't just hand money to CASEl without a receipt. So I can't. I've looked at a lot of websites, and I've seen very few quite as committed as Fetzer.
Bill and Melinda Gates is definitely one.
Oh, but Bill and Melinda is very.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, like, to the spiritual.
Oh yeah, totally. I got you. I thought you meant in terms of money.
Oh no.
Yeah, because Bill and Melinda Gates have got like 1.7 billion behind SEL.
That dwarfs everybody in terms of the amount of money. But we also know a lot about Bill and Melinda Gates, Bill in particular, about some of his. He's wants to reduce world population, and he's got other kind of things. So they come at these things from slightly different perspectives. I am not accusing Bill Gates of being an occultist. Okay, we don't know. Let's put it that way.
But allegedly on the list of world servers for the Lucius Trust at one point, but that is no longer the case. So I don't know why that is.
We don't know. But what I'm saying is, he knows that Fetzer's there, and he's not pulling his money. He's not saying, I don't want to be associated with these people, or they're not pulling their money. And they have somehow their needs or their wants align. And that's why I say, like, whether you're a cynic or you're, like a person who actually agrees with us and sees that this is like a religious thing that's being pushed into our schools, their needs are aligned somehow, and our kids' needs are not. They are not what our children
need. Our kids. Our kids don't need them.
They need our kids. And where I come from in this, for those of you who don't know me, if you're new to the channel, is that I'm an individualist. Okay. You might even call me like a classical liberal, whatever you want to call me, but I'm a person who believes that each and every individual child has a right to decide whatever they want to be in life, and to do their level best, unhindered by government or outside forces, to make that happen. And that we as parents are there to facilitate that. And that's it. That's it in a nutshell. There's no promises. Not all kids are born equally capable of learning all things or doing all things. Yes, we can try to help them find their unique talents or whatever. But the reality is, it's going to be up to them. And we're just facilitators. And that is their birthright. Their birthright is not to have some outside mystical, these people off in a place, in an office, in a foundation, deciding, aggregating and disaggregating data collected in little forms or whatever, or on a spreadsheet, saying you will be this and you will be this, and we have decided your gifts are X and yours are Y, and accept it. Like, I think that is absolutely sinister. And if you're tempted to think, well, wouldn't it make life so much more, it would be in the law of a job and it wouldn't be great, think about it for a second. I want you to sit down with your child, however old your child is, and ask them. If they're old enough to have the conversation, if they're older than 10, say, like, how would you feel if a group of really, really smart people sitting in office in Davos somewhere decided that because you're good at this, that's what you're going to do for a living, and that no choices, they've decided, but you'll be employed and you'll have a place to live and everything, but that they've decided. Are you okay with that? Is it good that some person you never met decide that? I can almost guarantee you that 90% of kids will be like, what? No. I'm not okay with that. But they don't get asked, do they? So, I would also encourage everyone to go back and reread A Wrinkle in Time if you haven't read it recently, or if you've never read it. Did you read it, James? Have you read The
Not
Mental?
recently. It's been a long time. I need to read it
But
again.
yeah, I've read it recently because I use it as a book for tutoring. And when you talked about the world brain,
Oh yeah,
that's
that's in Alice Bailey's book. It's the generation of the world brain.
right. Well, that's it in Wrinkle in Time. And pretty much everything about the planet they go to rescue the dad is the world that Alice Bailey envisioned. As you were reading from her book, as you were talking, I was like, this is absolutely Wrinkle in Time. This is what Madeleine L'Engle wrote about in the 60s in a children's book that was terrifying. I mean, it was good. It was really, really good, sort of sci-fi sort of thing, but quite scary. And I mean, even as an adult rereading it, I was like, it was scary because I could see it. And I know there are people alive today who think that sounds wonderful. And I'm like, oh my God, that's terrifying.
Yikes.
The brain that knows everything, it knows your every thought, it knows your every move, and it controls those thoughts and controls those moves by removing the brain, it says is, I'm taking away the burden. They called it a burden of decision making from you. I'm freeing you. I'm liberating you from this burden of having to make these decisions. Isn't it better? They give you this gruel to eat, but they tell you it tastes wonderful. Bugs, anyone? This is all in the book. This is all in a children's book. And I wonder why she wrote it. Like, was she aware of something going on? I have no idea. I think she just wrote it as a children's book. But that's what Alice Bailey envisions, is that our kids are just like you said, they're just raw material, like clay, to be molded and shaped.
But to be separated, she says, every child should be studied in 3 directions. First, to ascertain the natural trend of his impulses. Are they toward physical expression, toward manual labor, in which one would include such a wide range of opportunity as that of the mechanical factory worker and the trained skill of the electrician? Is there a latent capacity for one or other of the arts, a reaction to color and to form, or a response to music and rhythm? Is the intellectual caliber one that should warrant a definitely mental training in analysis, deduction, mathematics, or logic? Then perhaps as life goes on, our young people will be graded into 2 groups. The mystical, under which heading one would group those with religious, artistic, and the more impractical tendencies, and the occult, which would include the intellectual, scientific, and mental types. And that should be done by the time the child is 17. Alice Bailey tells us in The Education to Come in the New
Don't
Age.
forget their endocrine system. We got to study
So you
that.
can be a worker, you can be a mystic, or you can be an occult leader.
Yeah, those
a stakeholder.
A stakeholder, right? And didn't she also talk about, was it her who talked about how there weren't enough souls?
Yeah, that's in the Planned Parenthood part.
There weren't enough. There are too many babies, not enough souls.
Yeah, that's in the parenthood part. I'm trying to. I mean, it's not hard to find that because she doesn't use the word parenthood that many times in the book, but the angle of parenthood. Yeah,
now the woman had 3 children, and one of the things I did in preparation for the show is I said, I'm always curious whenever these control freaks get going, and 20 some odd books that's she got going. I'm always curious about their own personal lives, because if there's one thing I've noticed is, correlates, is the more control freak a person is, the worse their personal life is. Look at Karl Marx, right? I mean, like, their personal life is a shambles. So I went looking. Now, she did get divorced from her first husband before she married Bailey, and she had 3 children by the first guy. And I cannot find, they must absolutely guard her personal story other than her divorce, which she wanted. She asked for it. She sought the divorce, and she got it in 1915. And she got the kids and then had to work in a sardine factory or something to support herself and the children. But beyond that, I cannot find anything. Now, granted, I didn't spend hours doing it. I couldn't find anything about her children, because I'd be fascinated. Here's a woman telling us what all of our children should be learning, what all our children should be doing, forever and always. There she is writing in the early part of the 20th century, but this is what she envisions for the rest of us in the future. And I was so curious what kind of mother she was. Because, I look at somebody like Randy Weingarten, who has no children at all and loves to tell us what kind of parents we should be. But I find it fascinating the more they have strong opinions on how we should raise our children, either they don't have children or they have very weird relationships with their children. So I would be fascinated to find out what went on with that. Did John Fetzer have children? Was he married? What's up with that?
He did have children. I do know that because one of
Yeah.
his sons is involved in. Actually, no, it may be one of his nephews. So maybe he didn't. I
Okay.
think he did though.
So, but it's like they have so many strong opinions about what children should do and be that you can't help but wonder what their childhoods were like, how much projections going on, like what's going on here. But
yeah, no kidding.
that soul thing was creepy. There are not enough souls, and so abortion's okay because they're soulless anyway. We don't have enough souls to go around. Was basically what she was
I
saying.
think I'm at the right part, but I'm not entirely positive. I'm trying to skim through real quick. Because it's where she actually says parenthood needs to be planned, but
Yes.
she does say at this part, it says that one could, and in fact this should be carefully borne in mind, divide the hierarchy into two basic groups: those souls who have reached perfection and achieved status of divine servers, and those souls who are in the process of evolution and passing through the periods of continual incarnation. It might be in the section afterwards, but it's like attention is now being paid to the birth rate, its rise and fall, to correct care of mothers and children, even in the prenatal period, and to the education of parents everywhere. Out of this, new ideas and attitudes must eventually arise, which will be in line with the coming world culture and concepts. But today, the motivation for this solicitude is wrong. The interior impulse to deal with the whole problem of parenthood is in a newer and better way is right. The objectives, however, which are held before the race, are not the highest or the most desirable. The necessity of the times will eventually produce radical changes in the approach to family life, parenthood, and the training of children. And for this, a nucleus is preparing the way, or it can do so if faithful, attentive, and intelligent work is done. But I'm trying to find the part where she actually says the thing about the souls. The emphasis in the future will shift from the urge to produce large families to that of producing quality and intelligence in the offspring. This will include that science of which eugenics is a distorted and exoteric indication. The fact of the etheric body with its four centers is scientifically established. The above prophecy will assume significance or meaning. The need of an increasing birth rate will eventually be regarded as erroneous. And this is for three reasons, for which would profit you to study. Many souls are rapidly achieving perfection and passing away altogether from our planetary life. This process will be intensified during the coming Aquarian age. It should be remembered that the door will be shut for some time as yet upon the animal kingdom, and for a long period, no individualization will culminate in materialization into physical bodies. Technically, any individualization which may take place will be that which is technically called individualization into pralaya, I guess, there to await the inevitable call. There will be therefore no necessity for a massed and hurried creation of human forms. And she goes on to say that this is going to require us, under the Hermetic laws, to make sure the laws of rhythm and approach, blah, 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 that these Hermetic laws are going to have to deal with the fact that beyond a certain point, the planet cannot support humanity, because that is now evident, she says. This is more fundamental in its implications than you can imagine. But she says somewhere shortly after this that parenthood needs to be planned more carefully because all the good souls are leaving. I think it's this part with the science of eugenics and sex hygiene, the development of mentally controlled relationships will continually grow. This is what she's envisioning for the future world.
And there are
The
a lot of
underlying idea
people.
governing, this is it, Planned Parenthood. The underlying idea governing all that has been given out on the sex relation heretofore is twofold in implication. A, to provide bodies for incarnating souls so that certain destined evolutionary unfoldments may be carried forward and the attainment of an equally destined and inevitable spiritual unfoldment becomes possible. B, to impart the scientific procedure whereby bodies, quote, built in the dark may gradually be superseded by bodies, quote, built in the light. Thus, will be brought about the manifestation of the foundational light aspect of the world and its underlying structure. The sex relation, therefore, has only one major objective, which is to produce physical bodies for incarnating souls. The relation between the soul and the personality is consequently at a higher aspect of the being, sex expression of the universe, basic sex expression of the universe. And this relation is intended to bring about the appearance of a Son of God as the light of the world, enabling him to say, as did the Christ, that he is the light of the world, and to fulfill the injunction to let your light shine. Let's see if I can find the part where she says it has to be planned. I don't think she uses that word very many times either.
So how far is this from deciding who gets to reproduce and who doesn't?
Not very. I mean, she said that, that eugenics is the idea. It just got done clumsily. I mean, she actually said that. That's that exoteric form, crazy stuff. I wish she actually put the phrase Planned Parenthood, which it's not, but it's close to that. And I know I read it in the long podcast I did.
Well, we know she knew.
It's the planned intention of parents. That's where it is. This lack of sexual control has brought into the world thousands of unwanted children whose appearance is solely the result of accidental and uncontrolled sexual relations, and in no way indicates the planned intention of parents. It says planned because intended to offer experience to incarnating souls with the conscious intent of offering the opportunity to hasten the birth into the light of those particular souls, thus rendering service to the divine plan. And so that's when she says that we're going to have to do Planned Parenthood in the next section with the sexual hygiene and so on. But it all comes down to the fact that it's this section C or whatever, is that there's not enough good souls to deal with it. That's the same thing as where I read that. I just didn't finish the paragraph before.
Yeah.
It's the same one where she said there's not enough good souls.
When I was listening to your podcast, I literally stopped what I was doing and I was like, I'm sorry, what?
And that's why
I was
we have
listening
war.
and listening, and then I just kind of stopped in my tracks.
He actually says that's why there's war, is because we've brought too many inferior souls into being.
She also has, I don't know if it's her or the guy writing the forward to the other book who talked about the Japanese. And I mean, they have some very cockamamie ideas about history. The people who follow her, it was that university professor who was,
University of Pittsburgh or whatever.
Yeah. So the thing that just stood out to me about all of this is the so-called smart people, the ones at our universities, the ones telling us how to raise our kids, how to educate our kids, and what they must and need. Your children need this. This is so important. Yeah. And, this is how they learn. They will actually convince millions of parents that their children will not learn how to get along with other humans without SEL.
So this is from Alice Bailey.
They genuinely tell them that, and parents go, "Oh, well."
And so she's talking about the purposes for what she's talking about. She says, second, the emerging of a new racial type. The subjective outlines of this type can already be clearly seen. So glamored are we by the form side that many claims are made today that the new race is to be found in America. The new race is forming in every land, but primarily in those lands where the fifth or Caucasian races are to be found. Among the fourth race peoples, however, a few, such as those found among the Chinese and Japanese, are being discovered by the hierarchy and making their real and esoteric contribution to the whole. So she's talking about different racial types, and she's like, Asian people, no, not so much. Such as the esoteric control of the law of correspondence, she says, I would remind you nevertheless that the only fourth race people to be found upon our planet are the Chinese, the Japanese, the various Mongoloid races in Central Asia.
Mongoloid races.
Mongoloid races. And they are somewhat intermixed with the Caucasian race and the hybrid groups found in the many islands in the southern waters in both oceans and hemispheres, as well as the descendants. But she's saying that before that, she says, let me make one definite statement at this point, which may cause some surprise. The fifth kingdom in nature, the spiritual, will emerge out of the fifth root race. And then she's explaining that the Japanese, the Chinese, and the Mongoloids are mostly fourth root race, so it's probably not coming from there. And then she says that she already pointed to the Caucasians, and then says the new racial type is far more a state of consciousness than a physical form. It is a state of mind more than a peculiarly designed body. In time, however, any developed state of consciousness invariably conditions and determines the body and nature and produces finally certain physical characteristics. That's Hitler shit right there. I mean, that's just 100%. Straight up.
So I have to ask you this. What do you think? Because obviously these people this is still very popular. I mean, this is they her Lucius Trust has an office across from Parliament. They've got the publishing company. Yeah,
they didn't let me in.
They didn't let you in. And then they've got their publishing company in the UN and everything. They have all their servers and all this. It's still popular, and obviously it's been popular through the decades. what is it that you think appeals to people? Or, there even right now, there might even be people listening to this podcast, to this show, who are saying like, yeah, I got to go read more of Alice Bailey. This not, I don't know what's the problem. Why do you guys have a problem with, establishing one world government and one religion, and we all have a connection with our souls, or whatever the hell? Like, there, there are people who would find this all very appealing, who we would tell this is part of SEL, and they'll be like, good.
Yeah, I mean, that's like when I run into these rich parents, private school parents sometimes, who are like, well, if this is the new world, that's fine. I just want my kids to be in charge of it. And I'm like, you want your kids to rule in hell rather than to serve in heaven. I got you. Okay. That's literally what that phrase means. And it refers to somebody, and that's what you want for your kids. I'm trying to see real quickly if I happen. I don't think I have this book open. It has a great quote about it I could find quickly, that what appeals, but it's talking about Hegel. The book is called Hegel and the Hermetic Tradition. But I don't think I have it on my laptop. I know I have it on my phone. That's where I read it. It's fun reading books on phones. I'm going blind for this project too. I made the joke the other day that they say that masturbation makes you go blind, but it's not masturbation. It's reading communism makes you go blind. Ask me how I know. So at any rate, the quote is, it's attributed to this guy, H.S. Harris, who I'm not quite sure who that is, but he's cited repeatedly throughout this book by Glenn Alexander McGee, called Hegel and the Hermetic Tradition, which frames out Hegel as one of these esotericists, roughly 1800. And what is so appealing about Hegel's philosophy, or what would be so appealing, is that he gives you, or this hermetic or this esoteric view, this occult view, it gives you the idea that you're going to be able to live life, and I'm screwing up the quote a little bit, but it gives you the idea you're going to be able to live life in the light of a perfect day. And thus, that's what you're looking for, is you get to live under the eternal sunshine of a perfect day if this all works. If everybody just got along, if we all had the science of right human relations, we'd always be doing human relations correctly. And it would be true because it's a science.
Correctly.
Well, exactly. That's right. And so it's the typical thing that these people are like, if everybody lived in a way that served what I want and need, everything in the world would be better.
So in essence, we are following, you can call them demons, you can call them demented.
Yeah, for sure, right?
We're following these kind of, our children are basically following the lead of crazy people.
That's
right.
I
mean, I don't mean that as a pejorative. I mean it literally.
I also mean that literally. That yes, these are crazy people. These are at the very least, some of them might just be like kind of wacky spiritualists, but you are guaranteed to have a large mix of megalomaniacs in them. The typical cult leader, your typical sociopaths who want to control people and get them to do what they want, etc. And then when you ask, not to dice on my buddy Ian Crossland from Tim Pool, right, from Timcast, but do you think Ian's going to be the kind of guy, because he's kind of into this stuff a little bit, you think he's going to rise up and try to run a totalitarian show? No, he's a seeker. He's a hippie. It's going to be the ones who are actually the megalomaniacs, the ones who are psychopaths, that are always going to rise to the top of these orders.
Strangely, a lot of them have a lot of money, and I can't figure out if there's something about getting to have that level of wealth that causes you to be a megalomaniac, or if it's just the megalomaniacs are better at earning.
Yeah, well, I think there's probably some of both there. But Madonna got like super famous and super rich, and then her career kind of like started to fade, and she got super bored with all of her super resources. She's looking for the next thing. What does she get into? Kabbalah. And she's like in her bathtub doing weird rituals and making videos about it. And like, what are you doing, Madonna? That may actually be a trend toward, things that rich people do. There might be a selection bias to where people who, are the kind of big risk takers and visionaries who are able to build big things are drawn to, well, how can I build even bigger things? I don't know. But
I mean, I don't know either. I just have noticed this correlation. And like you say, I'm not afraid of the average person who likes to meditate. I mean, I've meditated in the past, I don't, yoga doesn't bother me. Like we're not,
it's not about that.
It's not about that. I don't want anyone to think that we're sitting here saying, like, if you consider yourself a spiritual person or whatever, spiritualism and being a spiritual person two different things.
That's
Like
right. They are not the
one is
same.
a cult and one is, like you said, if you're individually seeking a way to live your individual life on this planet in a way that makes you feel better or whatever, that's absolutely, you're right. I would support that 100%. It's
I
when
do.
you decide that all the children of the world need to do it your way because reasons that I have a problem.
To usher in a new age of being that won't include the people of the old age of being. Like, come on, like,
Yeah,
big
that's,
problem.
and when you have billions of dollars behind you that are not only yours, but you've managed to persuade people who have access to my money and yours and all the rest of ours to steal it from us for the purpose of making your woo-woo ideas to come true or something, then I have a very, very serious problem with it. And that is why I find this all so disturbing, is that I don't for a single second think they're going to be, practically successful at any of the brainwashing an entire world. But I do think they are going to be very successful. They already are very successful at brain damaging
That's what usually happens. And
a
most
lot
people
of
who end
people.
up brainwashed eventually have a crack from it, and they start going through a process called reintegration, a psychological process where it very
Very
much looks
painful.
like they've gone crazy.
Mm.
There were good reasons to believe that when Britney Spears lost her shit and shaved her head, that she was going through a process of reintegration
Yeah.
after whatever
Some people
handling
just
she
kill
had
themselves.
coming
They
out of
can't handle it.
yeah,
Yeah.
because you're living in two realities at once. One
Yeah.
might suggest that Mr. Kanye is going through some reintegration kind of cyclically, and then all of a sudden they say he's off his meds, but his meds are to keep him from reintegrating. One might suggest these things.
Who knows? But I do know that this is very serious, and we owe you a lot for putting your health on the line to dive into it. I admit, I've been working on the SEL thing for a long time, and I missed it. I didn't see it until you
I
brought
mean,
it
I
up.
kept seeing the Fetzer. I'm like, well, I'm going to go look, and I know it's all spiritual, but let's see what kind of spiritual. And then it's like Alice Bailey. I'm like, well, let's go find out about this. And I'm like, where can
Right,
I find this book? And I type it in, and I'm like, UNESCO. Why the hell is that book on UNESCO? That's weird.
right.
And then all of a sudden, I'm like tumbling down this rabbit hole of like, wait, this one's a real rabbit hole. This isn't like some crazy stuff. And then I was like, well, let's just read the book from Bailey. And I'm like, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God.
Right.
What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Oh no.
Yeah, and I
Oh
I can't even
no.
imagine what you went through. And I'll admit, I freely confess that I drew courage. Here's my sword. I drew
Uh-huh.
courage in terms of speaking about this because you'd already done it. It's like
It's
James
thank you
Lindsay's
for being a
already talked
second.
about it. I can swords up on it
Yeah.
because if I had found this and I would have probably done the same thing. I would have been like, "Doo, doo, doo,
Yeah, just
doo."
hum and walk away.
Not sure I'm gonna touch this one. But you went before, and you were the light bringer. No, I'm kidding.
Help! No, stop.
Joking. I'm joking. I can't thank you enough, and thank you for doing this on a Friday night for all of us.
Was it
I
Friday? I never know what day of the week it is. It's
Yes.
Festivus. I'm
It
airing my grievances against what they're
is
doing
it
in the schools.
Festivus?
It
Is
is.
it?
It's
I just
Festivus.
know it as the fifth night of Hanukkah. That's what I
Oh yeah,
have
no.
to say.
Festivus is a holiday for everybody. It transcends religious traditions.
Oh yes. Well, I get Christmas and Hanukkah in this house, but we don't have the Festivus. What is it? A bush, a tree, a broom?
It's an
What is it?
aluminum pole.
It's an aluminum pole. That's right.
That's
The
right.
airing of grievances. I like
That's what I
that.
did. I aired my grievances against the education system, the Department of Education
Well, I
tonight.
do that every day is Festivus. Every day is Festivus.
That's a Festivus miracle, as you would say.
Yes, if there's a day that goes by where I don't do that, that would be the Festivus miracle. So so in addition to buying your book, which everyone should go do, The Marxification of Education, what do you got? Yes, there it is. Go get it. What else are you doing, or are you traveling all over? Are you doing any other kind of cool
Actually,
stuff?
I'm
Yeah.
probably not going anywhere for the rest of the year. One doesn't know for
Well, the
sure,
rest of the
but
year is like this much.
well, I don't think you understand how my schedule works. I had 2 surprise trips to Dallas scheduled in just the last 8 days, one of which I took, and one of which the plane caught on fire and I didn't go, but I would have taken. And so probably don't go anywhere else this year. I am going to go get back on to the traveling horse pretty quickly in January. I'll be around everywhere again. But so next year's
Okay.
going to be wild. But follow me on social media. The website's newdiscourses.com. The New Discourses page is, or social media presence is at New Discourses. My social media presence is at Conceptual James. I am not on Facebook anymore. They threw me off for making jokes about Canadian assisted suicide. So I got kicked off Facebook for life for that. But I'm back on Twitter because of Elon, as long as he can keep that rickety basket together.
Yeah, exactly. It is a rickety basket. Facebook is, well, we now know that Facebook is more full of FBI and CIA and Homeland Security than anybody. I mean, that's when they first said, oh, Twitter has all these people. I'm like, you think Facebook doesn't? All right. Well, James, thank you again. The replay will be up immediately. You guys, please like, share, comment, subscribe if you aren't already. I so appreciate everyone being here tonight, and I hope you all have a fantastic holiday, whatever you celebrate. Please enjoy it, and I will see you probably in the new year. All right, take it easy.